All right, we are live. Welcome everyone to episode, what is this? 18 of Into the Minefield. I'm your host, Maddie. Great to be back. Tonight, we've talked about some books on this show before. We talked about, the book on the Fourth Crusades, which I think was the best episode we've done so far. I've done so far. I did that one solo. I recommend you all go back and check that one out. The Fourth Crusade was a really good one. Really enjoyed doing that one. And then we talked about Rachel, friend of the show, Rachel Wilson, Based Homeschool Mom. We talked about her book. I have it right here, and I can't ever remember the title of it. Where is it? It's on the shelf. I can't find it. Whatever. Y'all know the book I'm talking about. Shout out to Rachel. Shout out to Dejaya, Real John Connor, Jason in the chat. Glad to see y'all here. John Connor, I did a Fourth Crusade stream. It's been several months ago. If you scroll, you might have to scroll back a little ways in the channel to get there. I think it was like the third or fourth stream I did. So, we got Jethro. What's up, Jethro? So yeah, that was a fun one. And then, we did the one with Rachel, and then, I don't know, I've talked about some books and other ones, but tonight we are doing our first literary stream. So this is the first time we've done literature on here. I've been wanting to do one of these for a while, and I started reading the book we're talking about tonight, this one, Bonfire, the Vanities by Tom Wolfe, which I'd read a bunch of excerpts from some of Tom Wolfe's books. Like, let's see, I have a big collection of his over there, and I can't see from all the way. It's like he's got long titles of all his books. It's like what's up, Toledo? The electric Kool-Aid acid test and the candy flake, orange, tangerine, something. I can't ever remember those. I can't see the titles on the spine of that book from over here. And then, The Right Stuff, great movie. I haven't read that book yet, but I've read a bunch of his like I said, excerpts. What's up, Mella? Bunch of excerpts from his books. And really interesting guy. A Richmonder. And also, I just realized, speaking of Richmond, I'm actually wearing my Tim Barry shirt. So for those of y'all who don't know, Tim Barry is the frontman for Avail, a really good Richmond, kind of melodic punk rock hardcore band. And I would, my co-host might disagree with me, but because he's a Richmonder, and I've actually never been to Richmond, but in my humble opinion, Tim Barry's songwriting is Richmond's greatest export. I think that is the best thing to come out of Richmond. So anyway, yes. So I've mentioned my co-host, a regular here over Digital Minefield. And when I decided to do a literary stream, there was one person I had to go to, and we'll go ahead and bring him on. Y'all know him, y'all love him. It's Bazed Lit Analyzer, and here we go. Welcome back to the show.
Yo, what's up? The Occult Roots of Feminism.
Occult Roots of, thank you. I don't know why I'm blanking out on titles today.
Rachel Wilson's best-selling book. We know her from Exposing Powerful Lies live streams. We know her from Tucker Carlson. We know her from all sorts of primetime spots. She's also a best-selling author, and she's published in multiple languages now. The Occult Roots of Feminism, great book. Please buy it, everyone. Also, so Tom Wolfe, this is Bonfire, the Vanities. That's what we're covering tonight. And he's also the author of the Radical Chic and Mowing the Flat Catchers. You were saying the long titles. Yes. They are longer. People generally know him from The Right Stuff, which is his book about the astronauts and the lunar program in the 60s. And also from the Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test, which is the Merry Pranksters, the acid test, the buses, Ken Kesey, all that stuff. So Tom Wolfe, that was a great introduction, dude. And
Thank
Tom
you.
Is he is a full-fledged Richmonder. he sort of, he became a kind of archetypal New Yorker, but all you got to do is watch any interview with him, and in 5 seconds you can hear the Richmond and his accent come out right away. So,
Oh
I'm
yeah.
looking forward to this one. Yeah, let's go.
Yeah, let's get to it. Arnold Palmer, nice, excellent choice. I was a big fan of that. Oh yeah, Day Jire, who's watched Thin Red Line in the last 36 hours? I have not. It's been a while since I've seen that. I need to rewatch it. But there was one. This is just a fun kind of Easter egg for the audience here. If y'all saw BLA's Thin Red Line stream the other night, which if you haven't, go watch it or listen to it. It's I think it was outstanding. But he mentioned that a little tie-in between Bonfire of the Vanities and American Psycho. And so I think this is my opinion, maybe other people will disagree, but I think that it's that Bonfire of the Vanities, excuse me, exists in sort of the same literary universe as American Psycho, Rules of Attraction, Glamorama, Lunar Park, Less Than Zero, and The Secret History, right? Secret History by Donna Tartt. There's a lot of tie-ins between that and Rules of Attraction, and then we know Patrick Bateman. He is obviously the main character in American Psycho. He also appears in Luna Park, Glamorama, Rules of Attraction, and then the way Less Than Zero ties in is that Clay, who's the protagonist of Less Than Zero, he is he also makes an appearance in the Rules of Attraction. So it's kind of these people who all sort of exist in the same world. And yeah, so BLA has covered a lot of these. Definitely go check his streams out on that. And I will admit, and we got to get rolling on this because BLA is going to be on Boiler Room, one of my favorite shows tonight. You can check that out at Rockfin, ROKFIN.com. Just search Boiler Room. Or you can listen, I think you can still listen to the radio stream on alternatecurrentradio.com. But Bonfire of the Vanities, I will admit, I did kind of read this through the lens, because Ellis is one of my favorite writers. And so I sort of read this through the lens of American Psycho and his kind of works and Rules of Attraction, of that kind of people in that, in New York City and surrounding areas who have roots there. But anyway, yeah. So we'll go ahead and jump into it. We didn't really prep for how we were gonna do this one exactly. So where do you want to start off with?
That's all right. We can wing it. We're gonna wing it.
We'll do it live.
We're gonna do it live. He's gonna write it, and we'll do it live. So yeah, that was great because what you were just saying. Because first of all, thanks for the plug for Boiler Room. I think that we have 86th Boiler Room for tonight because the man Hesh is on assignment somewhere. He's in the South. That's all I'll say. He's somewhere, and everybody's got a bunch of stuff going on. Not me, because I'm chilling, because I'm on vacay, at least for this weekend.
Nice.
But thanks for the plug, man. So appreciate that. Yes, and so yeah, it does. That's a good point about Tom Wolfe's work and Bret Easton Ellis's work kind of existing in the same universe, because it's clear. I mean, look, he works at Pearson Pierce, right? Mergers and acquisitions, murders and executions. It's clear that Ellis obviously took that from Tom Wolfe. I mean, he had to have.
Yeah.
And not only because it's like, it's kind of a generic name for bonds and Wall Street and all that stuff, but because his writing style is reminiscent of Tom Wolfe. Tom Wolfe has this writing style. He's part of this school, if you want to call it that, called essentially new journalism, which for the folks at home, what that means really is that he is kind of a serialized writer for Rolling Stone. He writes for kind of pop publications, but his writing style is objective, and he's a guy who's there witnessing everything. And he claims that his works are not satirical, that he's not offering an opinion on anything, and it's just the way things are. It's just a depiction of the times. Now, that is not true. I mean, it can't be true. Right? A writer has opinions and ideas and insight into things. And in a way, Tom Wolfe is kind of the opposite of like gonzo journalism of Hunter S. Thompson, because Thompson's goal was, also writing for Rolling Stone and such, was to cover events, but to make the writer or the journalist part of the events. Like, he's part of the story. And in fact, the story that he's covering, like, just kind of takes a bench, and because he's covering sports usually.
Mhm.
And the coverage itself becomes the story because it's interesting.
Mhm.
And of course it's like hyperbolic, and there's Thompson's like over the top style in it, but Tom Wolfe, like, kind of in a way aims to do the same thing with his new journalistic approach. But the problem with this book is, and before we like get into our opinions about the book, I'll just say that it's a thick book, it's big, and it's like that on purpose because it's covering like a mammoth period, and the subject matter is huge. But it can get tedious. This book can get tedious, and
Yes.
that surprised me because his other books are so funny, they're so witty, and they roll along. Like, especially this book, which is a small book,
Mhm.
is so it's so clever and so funny and so witty, and so it is satirical. And this book is really about, like, the first part of the book is about the socialites who gather in somebody's upscale apartment in Manhattan, and they're like regaling the revolutionary group, and then they invite the Black Panthers and all this stuff, and they want to be cool and hip because they have the political people there, even though they're the wealthy socialite people. But like, that's absurd on its face, and so his insights into it become so funny, and a lot of it is like about the fashion and the clothes and stuff. But this book, it's almost like Jan Wenner, paid him a huge amount of money in advance to write a serialized form in Rolling Stone every 2 weeks or every month. And he just kept going. And it's pretty long and tedious. What do you think? What are your initial thoughts about the book?
Yeah, I thought it kind of, I mean, it started off good, and then it kind of started to drag after a while. And I think it really picked up in the last 100 pages. And yeah, it's just, and we were messaging the other day, and I was saying that I just said something about the editor, but this book I think would have benefited from a better editor. And having been, being a writer and editor by trade, I'm sort of reading it where I'm like, okay, they could have cut that, they could have cut that, they could have cut that, and the story wouldn't have suffered any. We would have still gotten everything we needed to get. But it's like, we don't need 10 different repetitive like depictions of some woman's annoying laugh. Like, there's no reason for that. And it almost felt, and I enjoyed the novel overall, but it sort of felt like, I'm sure, I don't know if you ever, maybe I was just a slacker in school, but if you're ever writing an essay in high school and you just kind of like breeze through the book and you're like, okay, this has to be 5 pages. Let me just, cram, this with a bunch of unnecessary, if it's like an English essay or something, you're just like, oh, I'm just going to, type a bunch of crap in here and hope that, that's what it kind of, it's like, dude, you don't have a word count, it's not like you're trying to hit a page limit. And so, yeah, I think that, I think another thing,
the word count is like 10 bazillion.
Yeah.
This is a huge book. It feels longer reading this book than like Gravity's Rainbow by Pynchon, which is saying something, because that book is also like this, but that is like a purposeful maximalist, postmodern book about just like everything.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like that on purpose, but this book is not supposed to be that way. So it just feels tedious, right? It's like you were saying, the overly adjective strewn descriptions of the woman's laugh for like 7 pages, right, interspersed with like random characters and their laughs and like what they're doing and what they're buying that day.
Yeah.
It gets to be it just gets to be a lot.
And the where, and so like I was saying, I was kind of read this through the lens of American Psycho, is that, which I didn't really do intentionally. I just kind of started reading it and I was comparing it in my head to all these things, comparing and contrasting to American Psycho. Is one of the things, if you've read American Psycho, is the book, like Patrick Bateman details everything. He details everything about his apartment, what he's drinking, what kind of drugs they're doing, what everyone around him is wearing, down to the brand name, to like just in detail. But for that book, that kind of just like insane level of detail, it works for that because that's who Bateman is. And
Yes.
so in that case, like the excessive detail, and I'll admit, even the first one, I've only read American Psycho once, read it like 2 years ago, is while I was reading that, I actually started to get annoyed after a little while. But then it's like you keep reading, and then you're like, okay, now I get it. And so, but with this, it's like, yeah, we don't need, and there was a lot of characters that just felt like there was no need for them. It's like these people appear and then they disappear and you never hear about them again. And it's like, why do I need to know about this person who only appears in a span of like 10 pages, this detail about them? It just, yeah, so it did get a little tedious. And
Yes.
which,
So to hit on what you were just saying about American Psycho, so Ellis crafts his book that way, purposefully. Like when I did American Psycho, the analysis, I remember it took at least 100 pages to get to like the crux of the narrative. It was descriptions of people, places, and events, like ad nauseum, but it wasn't. But it was interesting though, because the whole time you're reading it, you feel like there's this tone of disgust, right? Because the speaker is this person who he hasn't done anything, terrible yet, or described anything terrible yet, but you just feel like he is disgusted by everything and everyone, and he's sort of he has this like weird vampire energy, right? Because I mean, he is a vampire in a lot of ways in the book, and many of Ellis's characters are, if not outright like in this book, The Informers, the best vignette in the book, it's a series of short stories, is this, it's about this guy Jamie, who is a Hollywood vampire, and he's a literal vampire, and it's he writes it in a way that's like actually terrifying. It's probably as close to what a vampire probably actually is in terms of, blood and energy and psychosis and sucking someone's soul away. It's pretty terrifying. But that's kind of what Bateman represents. But this book, you're like, okay, so first of all, the protagonist is also the antagonist, right? He's his own worst enemy. And the point of the book is that society sees that, and different elements of society are like trying to parasitically feed off that and rearrange it in a way that is beneficial to them, because it's the 80s. And it's like the book is obviously supposed to depict the absolute uber height of capitalist New York. And it does a pretty good job of that in terms of its descriptions, because that's why he has like pages and pages of clothes and sounds in New York and all these different people like that. That's form plus content. I get that. But the problem is that you're like, okay, but what are the stakes here? Right? Who's the bad guy? What's the antagonism in this? Like, what are we rooting against? Who are we rooting for? Do we really like the protagonist in this? Even his name, what's his name? Sherman
McCoy.
Yeah. So even his very name, I don't know, probably because I'm a Southerner. I don't even like this dude's name.
Yeah, I'm with you on that.
I mean, it's obviously there's McCoys and Hatfields, right? Hatfields, McCoy. I mean, he even mentions that in the book. Like when he was at school, somebody said that. But so if that's the case, that means that he has an enemy somewhere, and he has these like little piddly enemies throughout society in little ways, but there's nobody that's like his equal and that's like a man, right? So one thing about this book that I noticed right away is that there is a lack of a central, there's no Chad in this book, except maybe the preacher,
I know Kavitsky was kind of the judge. He was kind of that dude. He was kind of Chad. I mean, he had things in line.
Good point. Okay, so that dude is clearly the alpha, right?
Yeah.
He literally runs the court, and he puts people in their place. So, and he has a moral compass. He's got a moral universe. He enforces his ethics. So that's true. But that almost makes it an exception to the rule because he's in a court, and that's where you're going to find that. And outside of court, everyone just is going to go back to being chaotic like they were in the first place.
Yeah.
Like, I'm sorry, one more thing. So
you're good. You're good.
So where he works is especially, I don't know, disconcerting because, I when I think of like the stock market in 80s New York, it's like the big room and everybody's shouting and, it's like Wolf of Wall Street and all that stuff, right? Everybody's trying to outdo one another. But his thing is he says like he's the top earner at his company and he made $900 something thousand that year.
I think it was 980.
Like, yeah. And I'm like, really? That's even in the 80s. I'm like, that's it? Is this accurate? What is this? Is this even true in the book? Does he think that he's the top earner, but he's not? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, that was something. And I guess we should, I don't want to get ahead of myself here, but and again, going back to, again, with the, I don't want to preface this every time I'm saying it, but people understand, I was reading this through the sort of the Ellis's lens, is that Sherman McCoy, who's arguably the protagonist of the novel, even though Bateman does not appear in this novel, like everybody in this novel, not everybody, but a lot of the characters, and one thing just to go back is like all the characters in this novel pretty much suck. Like I liked Kavitsky, the judge, and I liked Killian, the lawyer, and everybody else was like, these people are horrible. They're just terrible people. But the thing is that McCoy, he wants to be Bateman because Bateman doesn't lack for anything, because McCoy, I think at a couple points in the novel, he says like, oh, I made almost $1 million last year. And he mentions going broke a few times because he's basically like spent more than he can afford. And he's like, he has these deals that his life hinges on making these deals. Whereas Bateman, he's at least second generation wealth, but probably, I think it's implied there's other, I don't think he's like, Rockefeller, Carnegie old money, but there's money there that comes from his family. And it's the difference between McCoy's dad being, he was like a Wall Street lawyer and like a big shot on Wall Street, but Bateman's dad basically owned, as Reese Witherspoon's character says in the film, like your dad practically owns the company, right? So his dad basically owns Pierce and Pierce, and Bateman can basically spend, like he has so much money he can't spend it all. And through all these like designer clothes, which that can drain your accounts pretty quickly, spending like that, any normal person, but like that's who he wants to be. He wants to be the guy who lives in, the huge apartment and, lacks for nothing. But and if you look at that, the thing with McCoy is he's having to go in and bust ass day after day after day, and he's having to get there early. He's staying late. He's basically killing himself to make money, while Bateman sits around listening to his Walkman with his feet on his desk all day and has like millions and millions and millions of dollars more than McCoy does. So it's a whole nother level within that. And again, I'm kind of comparing two books that are written by different people, but I think y'all get what I'm getting at.
Yes, Bateman watches Jeopardy at 10:30 in the morning. Like,
yeah,
he does nothing. His friends, none of them do anything, right? At one point they mentioned like the Fisher account. How'd you get the Fisher account? And it's like, which is like a kind of, that's just a satire of a conversation that one would have at Pierce and Pierce, but it's not like an actual conversation. Everything else that they talk about is just, spreading rumors, gossip, clothes, a bold stripe shirt, good buddy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Meetings that they got to take, but they don't actually do anything. But also one thing is that Sherman is part of that whole Yale thing. Right.
Yes, that's a good point
that Bateman mentions, right? Bateman mentions that who is it? Paul Allen went to St. Paul's, Harvard Business School. He goes to these clubs or whatever, but and his friends, probably all did that. But McCoy is clearly part of something different, which is the same thing, but it's the rival thing, which is that whole Yale thing, right? He hangs out at Flutie's, Nell's, the Cornell Club,
Harry's,
right?
Well, what's interesting, actually, I noticed this in. You mentioned the education is that McCoy went to Yale, and before that, he went to St. Paul's. Well, in the American Psycho movie, Bateman tells Willem Dafoe's character that Paul Allen went to Yale and he went to St. Paul's before that. So I thought that was kind of interesting that him and Paul Allen went to or Paul Owen, as he's called in the novel, went to the same school.
Yeah, and
same schools.
I don't know St. Paul's. I don't know that school. I mean, in reality, these guys would have gone to like Phillips Exeter.
Oh yeah.
Phillips Exeter. That's where like the Bushes and them go.
That's where Bateman went in the book.
Yes, and then Le Rose, the CIA boarding school in Switzerland, where Richard Helms went, and Kim Jong Un went there. That's
right. I forgot about that.
Yeah, there's a series. There's a network of boarding schools like in Massachusetts, Connecticut, etc., that are like that. Now, of course, Tom Wolfe, the author, went to my school, St. Christopher's boarding school. Was a boarding school when he went there, but is a private boys' school, and then went off to Yale, which is interesting because for the audience, people in the South at private boys' schools in the South don't usually tend to go to New England Ivy League schools. It's like I don't know. It's kind of seen as, I've always thought of it as like kind of fake and gray, like, and you could go. I mean, sure, but most people go to like William and Mary, for instance. Harvard's the oldest university in the country. William and Mary is second. Thomas Jefferson founded it. Christopher Wren designed it. It's much harder to get into Harvard, but it's much harder to stay at William and Mary. Once Harvard is the kind of school where once you are accepted into Harvard, it's like it's impossible to leave. It's impossible to you're going to be able to stay, and you'll always get to say, "Oh, I went to Harvard."
Right.
Which is one of those things that in reality, like when you're a grown man, people don't really talk about like where they went to college or law school or like what fraternity they were in, except for like a passing conversation. It's not important for anything.
Right. Real John Connor asked if it was, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, go ahead.
He was asking if it was St. Paul's in Concord. And so I looked up and there is a St. Paul's boarding school in Concord, New Hampshire. And I looked up their tuition, and now this is in 2023, 2024 years, but I mean, you can get a sense for what kind of school this is. Their tuition, which I guess is a high school, like a boarding school for high school students, it's $65,410 per year.
Now, is that for boarders?
Yeah, that's like tuition, boarding. So
because that obviously is like more money than like if we had kids, right? Could we pay that annually for tuition for our kids? Well, there are people that can, but actually for a boarding school, that's like medium to low for one of these boarding schools. Some of my friends went to Episcopal in Alexandria and Lawrenceville, which is in New Jersey, I think. And in the 90s, it was that much. So now it's
double that probably.
Yeah, I mean it's so much money that it's the type of thing that the people who send their sons there, it's not really a consideration, right? The tuition, it's just what you do. It'd be like if you were in England and you sent your son to Eton or Harrow, or one of those schools.
One of the interesting things I've noticed about these like boarding schools, the really expensive schools, like all the rich people's kids go to, is that like all the wealthy and powerful movers and shakers and whatnot, what's interesting about this, and I'm not in that world, so maybe I'm wrong. This is just an outsider's perspective. Is that it seems like they don't need to go there. Like there's no reason, because if you can, call the head of some bank and get your kid a job, like your kid could go to any school. It doesn't matter. Your kid doesn't have to go to Exeter. He doesn't have to go to, St. Paul's. Doesn't even have to go to Yale. Your kid could go to like state school, some state school somewhere, and would be fine. But it's one of those things where it's like, no, you have to go to these prestigious and exorbitantly expensive schools. Does that make sense?
Yes, I mean it does make sense, but the fact is that anybody in that position, like you honestly, you kill to be able to send your children to the top boarding schools, because I mean they do have a value for a reason. The education is, it's world class. Like for instance, the history books that you use in 6th grade are like the average university, 3rd year university history books.
Mm-hmm.
You're so far advanced. You have opportunities that are so far ahead of everyone. But part of that is it's this jungle mentality, right? Even when you're there with all of those people and you're in the same thing, there is this thing of competition where, everything is a competition and it always will be. Now, it's not an outright competition because you have to be a gentleman about it.
Mm-hmm.
But it is a competition. And I guess the thing is that about like sending your sons there is that it's still in the classical mode of the English boarding school, where the reason they've been around since, I don't know, Henry VIII. I put up one of the oldest English public schools, which is a private boarding school essentially, is that you would send your son off to boarding school when they were young, and there are no women, and you eliminate any kind of like feminine softness in their personality and in raising them, so that they learn to be hard, and their feelings are like all channeled into sports or academia or whatever it is, so that when they graduate, they're supposed to go on and run the empire.
Mm-hmm.
They're supposed to go off to the far-flung places and be like the governor of, Shanghai or Singapore, so that the people they are lording over, they don't have any like sympathy for them, because they have to keep the empire going. That's the whole point.
Yeah.
It's Kipling's White Man's Burden. It's all that
Mm-hmm.
stuff. It's it sort of came to a head in the 19th century in England in the Victorian era, but that still goes strong, even though we have this world where, all the stuff for us is changing. But it also may change a little bit in terms of their education within that system, but the traditions are it's the same. That never changes. And if you go to Phillips Exeter or Eton and you leave, you are at the top.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, you're at the very top, and you're always going to be that way, and you're educated to run those things. So this guy, it's interesting that this guy's mentality, because for one, I thought it was strange about the adultery, with in the movie, it's Melanie Griffith, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I just thought, okay, I get it. He's in New York, and people, this is common, I guess, and all this stuff. But it made him look so weak.
Yeah.
It's just ethically, morally weak, obviously, but also like in terms of his personality and his just force, his charisma, he seemed weak to me. He seemed like a kind of a Gumby man.
Yeah, I mean, he had Sherman McCoy. He had no spine. He had no backbone. Like he was this. It was weird because it was like he was this hard charging, top earner in his division or whatever. But he was like this paranoid, insecure, timid, like almost timid, like scared of conflict. He'd like get into it with people at work. There's that scene where the guy, I think it was like South American or something, who came over and he like told him off or whatever. But then, he just, yeah, it's like he's just this weak. Like, yeah, I think weakness is probably the best way to put it. Is that there's no backbone there. There's yeah, he is like this kind of soft, doughy, like personality wise, which I found very odd, and it didn't really make sense. But also, I mean, this one of the big themes with this book, and this is something that in the opening, like in the prologue, where there's what is it, the mayor who's at that town hall.
Yes.
And what one of the things I picked up on, like right out of the gate, is because Tom Wolfe will mention his, like, basically what these people are thinking. And so this guy, he's very insecure, he's paranoid, like he has these racing thoughts, and he's terrified. Like, one of the notes I made actually is one of the key themes of this book is obsession over perception, which I felt like a megachurch pastor when I thought about that, because they'll do those like kind of rhyming, goofy sort of things. But what I was getting at, like with McCoy wanting to be Bateman, is that all these people are so worried about how everyone around them is perceiving them, of how they're being seen. And what you see, it's kind of hinted at later on in the book, and this is from multiple characters, when they do these things to try to like make themselves look good, and they think that they're doing these things to, to appear strong or to appear powerful or whatever, they end up looking like idiots, and people make fun of them for it. But yeah, anyway, that's just one of the things I noticed, is that the people are, everybody's like wound up, scared of whatever, and that's only the people who are like striving to be other people. So like the cops, which we might get into later with, like the two main detectives, they don't care. They're not concerned. I mean, they do project certain images, or trying to project power and intimidation, but they're not trying to be any, like on a fundamental level, they're not trying to be anything that they're not, and they're not worried. They don't have these kind of paranoid, they're not gripped with these paranoid thoughts of what other people are thinking of them.
Yes, they also have a safety in the knowledge of their class, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they know that they don't even attempt to, like, they are nowhere close to what he keeps calling Sherman the master of the universe.
Mm-hmm.
He uses the term so much that it obviously becomes ironic, but he is truly, like, he's in Wall Street, New York, 80s. He's a WASP. He had all the best stuff. He's from the best place. Like, he is one of the guys who should be at the top. So the fact that he finds himself in the situation he does, where he's with this woman and they're driving and they like end up in the wrong neighborhood, and they are terrified of just anyone who is not in their social strata. And I actually found that part to be pretty truthful, pretty believable. Mm-hmm. In a number of ways, because even though those people, they would love to have like Castro, and they did in the 60s, they had Castro, up to the west side of Park Avenue, and he went to all the parties and stuff, and they like thought they were so cool by having this guy there. But at the same time, like, they're not going to go to the Bowery or to the East Village like accidentally. Mm-hmm. Right? If they go, it's going to be Bateman with his crew going to, his spas or whatever.
Right.
Because they're like going to the bad boy clubs or whatever downtown. That's totally different with the fellas than with like the older people and the literati and the who's the poet, Buffing. Forget
was Aubrey Buffing or something like that.
Aubrey Buffing, the poet, Nobel Prize shortlisted, and he has AIDS. Oh, wonderful. I thought that was actually pretty good. That was pretty accurate and pretty true. And that guy actually functions in the book kind of like a Greek chorus, right? Telling, he's directing us, the audience, the reader, which way this weird like anti-tragedy is going to go. Mm-hmm. But the problem is that, like you said, that Sherman, it's like when he's presented with the judge in the courtroom, the judge is like hyper aware of who he is and his power that he wields, and how he lords over everyone in that domain, right? They have to listen to him. And he's the moral authority. And when he speaks, like when they start talking in court and he's, hammering the gavel or whatever, it's like you listen to this guy, but he is an anomaly in their world. Like the fact that he has to even end up in the courtroom itself is like shameful for that group. They all they're all the time they're doing legalistic stuff and suing people and all that stuff. But like to be in the court for something, to be accused of something, right, is like that's heinous to them. So he has no backbone, he has no strength, he just doesn't seem like a man.
Yeah, I mean, he gets pushed around by women, and his wife. He's like, it's like he's scared of his wife. He's scared of his mistress, and this is a man basically with no principles. And I was going to go something like that, but yeah,
that's the key, probably, that you just nailed it right there. That he has no principles.
Yeah. So do you want to? Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Dog on the walk at the beginning, and it's raining outside, and the guy like confronts him. Oh, taking the dog on a walk. It's like that's like, oh boy, that's high drama to him, right? Yes, I'm taking the dog on a walk. Why are you noticing it? Right? It's like, yeah, he's not like, yeah, dude, I'm taking the dog on a walk. The dog has to go outside.
Yeah,
I'm taking the dog. He's not like a normal guy. Right. It's degrading for him to be seen like taking his dog outside the domain of his masterful, Xanadu apartment or whatever, next to Central Park. It's wild. I don't know.
So do you want to give we were talking about this earlier. So for the audience, just to put this out there. So the book itself, when you read it, the plot's not that complicated, but to try to explain, I was trying to explain it to somebody the other day, and it gets kind of convoluted. But let's try to give it a shot and just try to explain the kind of the plot and go through that and kind of a quick overview, because this is a long novel, so we're not going to be able to get through. We can't get through every single detail, but I think that might give people a better idea. We can kind of hit on some of the key characters and things like that.
Okay.
And then we can go from there and, discuss themes. And then I know we do want to touch on the film as well, which was awful, but in my opinion. But yeah, so let's give that a shot and see.
Yeah, I've changed my lens here because this is the Brian De Palma fisheye lens that he uses throughout the film. Yeah, the film is terrible. It's so bad. Anyway, so what happens in the book? Just a rundown of the narrative. There's a guy. His name's Sherman McCoy. He's the main character. He's the protagonist, and essentially, he is a bond trader.
Yeah, trader, salesman, all that. I guess trader would be the better way to put it.
He works on Wall Street, and he's in high finance, making big deals. And we refer to him as the master of the universe. He's a WASP. He's part of the upper class in New York, and he's married and all this stuff. But he is also having this relationship with this woman, and they go out in the car. They're driving somewhere. I'm skipping over a lot here, but basically what happens is
he picked her up from the airport and
yes, she's on the Concorde.
And he missed the turn, and they wind up in the Bronx.
Yeah, right, in the Bronx, which is just terrible. That just sounds awful to them. The Bronx, for the folks at home, is the borough north of Manhattan. And they get off the main road. They're lost in the Bronx, and they see two gentlemen on the street who, what are they? They come up to the car. They're like offering something. What are they?
There was something. It was a tire in the middle of the road because they were trying to go on the on ramp to get back on whatever the bridge or the freeway or whatever it is to get back into Manhattan. And so Sherman has to get out of the car to move this tire that's in the road.
Yes, and they can't tell whether these gentlemen are like trying to help them or, as they think, rob them. So the lady that he's with is like, get back in the car. They're robbing you. Where are we? We're in the jungle, and all of these are kind of R slur verging things that she says. They get in the car, and a bunch of shenanigans happen in the car, and then he like backs up in the car and he hits one of the fellas, right?
Or she did, because she was drunk, because he had gotten out and he like threw the tire at the guy, and there was basically this scuffle that ensued, and then she like takes off and ends up. They think that Sherman is pretty sure that she hit one of the small, because it was two guys. One of them they described as being big, and the other one was smaller, and so he's sure that she hit the small one.
Yes, and honestly, we can't tell whether the guys are trying to help them or not. In a way, it's kind of irrelevant. But are they? Hey, stop here and we'll help you with the tire. Get out of the car, because they're in a nice car and they have money, or are they genuinely trying to help? We don't know. But what happens is there's a lot of confusion, and like Maddie said, one of the guys is hit by the car, and then they drive off, and then there's a long section where they are obviously trying to tell themselves that no, nothing happened, nothing went wrong, and it's fine. We don't need to report it to the police. Sherman is considering this. Should I report this? But they don't, right? Isn't that what happens? I forget at this point.
Yeah, they end up not. And it's interesting because that conversation kind of descends. It starts off as like, oh, we survived this, attack, because they're convinced they've been attacked, when in reality, in the book, it's totally ambiguous. Like you like BLA said, you don't know if these guys were genuinely trying to help them or not. And it sort of descends into this kind of like rationalization of, oh, we don't need to report this. And one of the big themes, and not to get sidetracked on this, we can definitely return to this, but I think it's worth mentioning at this point, is that one of the big themes in here is virtue signaling, right? Where people want everyone to think like, oh, we're these, progressive, open-minded, we're liberal, we're not racist. But as it turns out, I mean, both Sherman and Maria, who's the woman that he is having an affair with, like they both are, I mean, like they're both racist. It's just that she's actually honest about it, whereas Sherman doesn't want to, and so she, drops at least one racial slur. And so like these are not, it's just interesting to see that kind of like, what we see now with, people, everybody wanting the world, making these, like, paying lip service to these ideas for everybody to, think that they're good people or whatever. And so, Ryan says, I hope Biz Markie had a cameo in the Bronx scene. Yeah, shout out to Biz Markie. I used to date a girl that was a huge Biz Markie fan, and like that was what was that song he had? Whatever I can't. It's that like big song, and I always forget the title, but
just a friend.
Just a friend. That's it.
Yeah. It's just a friend. Oh, baby.
Oh, one thing actually that's interesting, I have like a million sticky notes in here, as y'all can see. I was just going through some of these notes. One of the things that, so this Maria, the woman that Bateman, that Sherman is having an affair with, she is subletting someone's apartment. So this woman, this friend of hers, lives in a rent-controlled apartment in, I don't remember exactly which part of town, but I think it's somewhere in Manhattan. I don't know. But anyway, she's renting this apartment so her friend rents it. It's rent controlled for $331 a month. And she pays, I think, like $700 something for it. Maria does. And so she uses that to, because she's also married, right? So she's cheating on her husband with McCoy, and as it turns out, other people as well. And so there's this kind of scene. It's interesting because there's this scene, there's this mention, where he's sort of, it hints at him, like he describes the place as bohemian and how real it is. And he's basically saying, it's sort of this romanticization, if that's the right word, of the lower socioeconomic status, right? Because he lives up on Park Avenue, he's in like the rich part of Manhattan. But when he goes to this, walk-up apartment, then it's like, oh, this place is bohemian and real. But then we see when he actually goes someplace that's quote unquote real, he turns into jello and freaks out when all that happens is literally the two guys walk up to him and all they ask is like, hey, do you need help? And he, completely melts down and attacks them.
Yeah, there's the constant metaphor of the jungle.
Yeah.
Which is interesting because his whole business world is a jungle. It's a different kind of jungle. It takes on a whole different connotation with the way that, especially with the way that she describes it. And like you said, honestly, like even in his social sphere, it is uncouth to utter, ugly words about this, right? So, but she's kind of, I don't know, what do you say about her? She's like the archetypal. She is exactly like, what did I just read where she is exactly like this? She's the new woman. She is like, I guess like in the book Ethan Fromey, which is the turn of the century New England book that I read recently, which doesn't have a lot to do with this, except for the fact that the new woman is the woman who like is free in every way to express any thoughts, no matter how scandalous, to go anywhere in the city, to do anything, right? Except for when she's presented with real or actual danger or perceived danger.
Right.
And then it becomes this, like, I don't know, in a chivalrous world, he would take it, right? She's driving, but he would take on the risk and he would say, no, I was driving. But he doesn't because she's just a hoe, basically, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's what she is. But she is not even cognizant of that. She doesn't even care about that, which is also weird because in their world, like, you can't be seen with some mistress at a cocktail party. That's wild. You can't. It's not France.
Right.
Right. It's not like 17th century France. This is like 1980s New York. They're all wasps and, they like play tennis and like do business together. So even there, they can't do that stuff. I don't know. It is complex, the levels of society that are presented in this book. Without comment, a lot of times without comment, which is interesting. Well, sorry, that's volume. I just turned on. I found my phone. Sorry, I was looking for my phone.
Oh, you're good. Two things about that is, one thing is, in a way, I think you're right about that. She is a new woman. She is kind of the new woman. And in another way, I had this feeling that she was kind of like the femme fatale, the film noir from the 40s. And she is this kind of, character that sort of leads men, and in this case specifically McCoy, to his doom, more or less. And then, one other thing that's interesting is, on a recent stream, I know we're talking about Jane Austen, and I know you're not a fan, but one of the things with Jane Austen is that if you read like Pride and Prejudice, for example, is the people in that book, like one of the daughter or one of the sisters in the book, runs off with this guy, and they're, together unsupervised for an extended period of time, and it's very scandalous. Now you can kind of see that holdover from even, I think, in the sort of Anglo-Saxon, sort of, and I think a lot of this, like British, the Wall Street, kind of, it comes out of British society, where there is this emphasis on manners, where you can't be rude to people. Like, people are still ruled and governed by this certain code of how you're supposed to act in society, how you're supposed to treat other people, how, doing anything that's, taboo or, uncouth, whatever it may be specifically. And it's like, yeah, the people have been having affairs and, engaging in premarital relations, things like that forever. But it's like, you can't even have the semblance of doing, like, even if you're doing that, it's a huge problem, for to be seen that way, to the point where later on in the novel, Sherman is terrified. Like, he freaks out when him and his wife, because one of the things that happens earlier in the book is when he like BLA was talking about, when he goes out to take his dog for a walk in the rain, he's going to call Maria. Sherman is. He's going to call Maria, and he ends up calling his own house. So he calls his apartment, and his wife answers, and he doesn't realize this. I found kind of hard to believe. He doesn't recognize his wife's voice, and he's like, "Oh yeah, can I talk to Maria?" And his wife's like, "Sherman, is that you?" And then he like freaks out, and so then they all wind up at the same cocktail or dinner party.
He's such
a yeah, he's a complete dork. And he's petrified that, oh no, my wife's about to meet this woman named Maria. And it's like, how many people in the world are named Maria? And he's freaking out, terrified that his affair is going to get uncovered.
Right. It's so obvious. Like, it's first of all, how does this guy get his wife in the first place? I mean, we know how, because that's she was probably a debutante or whatever, and that's the thing to do. But like, why is she with this dude? This guy sucks so much.
Yeah, he's awful.
I guess because she knew him as stable, and he's got this job, and whatever. But like, still, this guy's a total dork. Like, you remember when Bateman is talking, and he's talking to Paul Allen, and Paul Allen is like the mistaken identity. And he's like, the Bateman, she's with that. What a dork. And he's like, another martini, Paul.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, or when Bateman calls the office and talks to his secretary, and he's like, why do you sound so fucking sad? Right. When he's like freaking out.
Yeah.
Of the film, at least. I mean, at least in that, it's like, this guy is totally off the rails, but we are aware of like his mode, his thing.
Mm-hmm.
We know why he's this way. We know if this is a satire, we know it's because these people are totally empty. But in this book, they're empty, but I guess the emptiness like resounds throughout the book, because it's just constant. Even the descriptions of clothes and fashion are kind of empty.
Mm-hmm.
Right. They're not like, you don't read them and think of anything luxurious, or you don't even really get vivid descriptions of people. It's just like, there's a guy, he's there, and he's describing what they look like.
Mm-hmm.
So in a way, I guess it's kind of masterful, because that's what 80s New York is. But before we go on, I just wanted to say, I heard from someone who knew Tom Wolfe really well. He's not alive anymore. He died a few years ago. Tom Wolfe did, but I asked him about something specific about him, and he said that Tom Wolfe claimed, or told him directly, that people thought that he was a satirist, but that he never wrote satire. He said that he just watched and listened and wrote down what he saw and heard. Nonsense, of course, but I think he believed it, is what this guy said. He also didn't respect fiction at all until he tried it. Tom Wolfe said, I thought writing a novel would be easy. You just make stuff up. He was truly surprised at how hard it was. I think that's a pretty insightful comment about who he was as an author, because, and this is someone reliable, this is another writer that Tom Wolfe often wrote blurbs for on the back of his publications. And I met him once, but it was very briefly. And I think that's interesting, because this thing about fiction, because his book reads like a report, like you were saying earlier, a book report or an essay. But the problem is, anyone who is a writer at all, even writing analytically, like in a class, and is writing an essay, is going to be caught out right away on the fact that they repeated their introductory paragraph or their thesis statement in their conclusion, or that they wrote the same word, a strong verb that stands out twice in a 5-paragraph essay. It's like, that's obvious. That's just bad writing.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting that this guy is considered, and he is, I mean, he's one of the big writers in American literature and American letters, especially of the latter half of the 20th century, right? He's a huge figure, but this book is so empty in terms of its, like, I can't quote a sentence from this book. And that's unusual for me, especially because I can always find, like Hemingway said, write one true sentence or one word, but I can't quote. There's nothing like quotable that I can think of in this. And that bothers me a lot.
Yeah, there was like one description of Quigley, who is Sherman's attorney's like investigator, and I can't quote it, but that was like one thing that really stuck out to me. I was like, okay, like that's really well done. But yeah, I mean, there was nothing. Yeah, I can't really. I don't know if I could quote anything specifically. I mean, do you know? I didn't look this up. Is this the only fiction Wolfe ever wrote, or did he ever write any other fiction aside from this?
Well, he wrote. I mean, The Right Stuff reads like fiction. And you could consider it a novel, but it's about real people and real events. And then what else? The Man in Full. The Man in Full was, I think that was his final book. I think that's fiction, but that's about like the fraternity system. Is that The Man in Full, or is that another one? He had a long period of not writing anything after Bonfire. But yeah, the other books are like new journalism in prose, in book length form. So, but they do read like, I mean, the Radical Chic book reads like a short novel, and it's really well written. It's really good, and it carries you along. But there is one word that stood out, and that's page 167 in this. This is the second edition.
Oh yeah.
And he says every spicy morsel in the series came from a girl he was seeing at that time, a resentful little girl named Jeannie Brokenborough, a rare book dealer's daughter who ran with the county set at the social runt in the stable. When little Miss Brokenborough moved on, Fallow's daily magic vanished with her. Well, Brokenborough stood out because that's a family name for me. That's my cousin's name.
Interesting.
Yeah, Brokey. That's an old Virginia name. The other is, he talked about one of the cars in the book was a Pontiac Bonneville, and he describes it as a boat. And we had an old antique Pontiac Bonneville for many years, and it was like a boat. It was a huge car, very long. So that stood out. And then also, last thing, he mentioned Rimbaud on page 354. He says, he's kind of talking about writing here. He says, poets are also not supposed to write epics any longer, despite the fact that the only poets who have endured and will endure are poets who have written epics. Homer, Virgil, Dante, Shakespeare, Milton, Spencer. Where will Mr. Eliot or Mr. Rimbaud, pronounced like Mr. Shaflet, be in their light even 25 years from now? In the shallows, I'm afraid, in the footnotes, deep in the Ibid thickets, along with Aubrey Buffing and a lot of other poets I've thought very, very highly of from time to time. So that was interesting, because that was a little section on literature itself and on poetry. And it could read as true from the speaker's vantage point, but it turns out it is not true. For one, Eliot and Rimbaud are fine in the canon. They've been set. But what he says about poets in general is true, because he's talking about this bad poet, Aubrey Buffing. And what is true is that this guy's like the Edward Arlington Robinson of the book. He has this veneer of being a great poet, an important person, but he's clearly not. He's just a pretentious, like, doofus.
Well, that's one of the things that was interesting is the two writers that are mentioned, and I think it's the only two, is Buffing and that Nunnally Void guy, the novelist. is that both of those guys are just like these absolute pretentious, insufferable bores. I mean, they're just these like windbags that everybody like fawns over. It's like these people are vapid. There's nothing there. They're just like dullards. And maybe dullards isn't the right word, but that's
Aubrey Buffing probably hangs out hangs out at Studio 54.
Yeah.
With Truman Capote and recounts other people's stories, and everyone knows him as the poet who was shortlisted for the Nobel supposedly and has AIDS.
Yeah, exactly. That's how he's known. Yeah. I thought that was kind of fun. She was just threw out there like, oh yeah, when at the party that this guy has AIDS. But yeah, to get back to the just to try to get through this really long. Again, like the plot's not complicated until you try to explain it to people. But so the assistant district attorney for the Bronx is this guy named Larry Kramer, who Kramer is, and there's something I want to touch on later, which we'll get to. But Kramer, even though he has not yet encountered McCoy, like I was saying, like McCoy wants to be Bateman. Well, Kramer wants to be McCoy. He wants to be that kind because Kramer, he went to law school and then he winds up he says in here how much he makes a year. It was like, even in like 80s New York, it was not that much. I don't know. But anyway, it's like $40,000 a year or something like that. Like it's not that much. And so Kramer is one of these characters. I didn't like him to begin with, and I just absolutely detested him by the end of the book. Like he's this just sniveling, just ingratiating, like creep. I mean, the guy, he has this obsession, and this actually got annoying. There's these muscles. I don't even know how to pronounce it. I'd never heard of them before, but I guess it's these like muscles in your neck or something that Kramer is really proud of because he's basically like, he's married, he has a kid, but he's just let himself go. And so he apparently, then like other characters later on in the book make fun of him for doing this, where it's like he'll like put his head back and like stick his neck out and like show off these obscure muscles that no one's ever heard of that he's hung up on, because he acknowledges the fact like, oh yeah, I've kind of let myself go, but he doesn't say it exactly like that. But yeah, like people around, he's not well liked. Like his neck.
What's the name of the neck muscle?
I was guessing it was in the neck. I didn't bother to look it up, but I don't know if I can find it. Let me see if I can find it. He mentions it in here somewhere. Oh gosh, where is it?
What's the name of that neck bone thing that Jeff Stein McEffrey?
Oh, the hyoid?
Yeah, there's that.
This was like the sternomalasticoids or something. I can't find it. Mentions it here a bunch, but now I can't find it. But
I think of Mussolini because of him jutting out his neck and his chin, exercising his stelasticomacoids.
Yeah, that might have been it. Yeah. And so yeah, he gets made fun of for that in the same way that McCoy, he has this chin. It's like this Yale chin that he keeps talking about, and he'll like stick his chin out. And later on, people make fun of him in the book for doing it. It's this idea of like, oh, I'm gonna project power or whatever, and then reality, like they look like idiots when they do this. And so yeah, Kramer is basically mad because he wants to still be that guy that 25-year-old guy running around Manhattan, trying to run through as many women as possible, being rich and being like a playboy man about town type, when, in reality, he's like this loser who, and it has nothing to do with how much, like, that's another thing with this book is a lot of the characters in here are losers. Even the people, because a lot of people think of like, oh, somebody rich and powerful, how could they be a loser? And it's like your socioeconomic status has nothing to do with that. Being a loser, that's like, I don't know if you call it a mindset, a personality. It's like a mindset. It's a way you conduct yourself. It's a way you carry yourself. So McCoy, even though he makes,
look at Gil Bates. Perfect.
Exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's that kind of thing. It's these people who are wealthy, but they're losers. And so Kramer's a loser because he's butthurt that he's not rich and powerful like the people he went to, or not powerful, but he's not like a rich lawyer, on Wall Street like some of the people that he went to law school with.
Right. Yeah.
Um,
Meanwhile, counterpoint to that is the what's the guy's name? Al Sharpton character in
Reverend
the book.
Bacon.
Yes. So that guy is like the counterpoint to that, because that guy is clearly not a loser in that sense, right? He
Right.
is like charismatic, and people like listen to him and flock to him, and when he speaks, people listen, regardless of what he's saying, and his motives. Like, that guy is not he's not a loser in that sense, right?
Yeah.
I mean, he can tell a story, he's funny, he can use words, like he projects charisma. Like you really do want to like that dude.
Yeah.
I mean, even though he's obviously a grifter maximum infinity level, you want to like him. The dude in the tracksuit with the gold chain and like the Jerry curls, like you want to hang with that dude.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and he has a way of dealing with people. Like there's this thing that comes up. It's these two characters that aren't really important in the grand scheme of things, but they appear a few times. So Reverend Bacon, I guess he's in the Episcopal Church or whatever, and I don't think he's in the Episcopal Church, but they basically gave him, I think it was $350,000. The diocese did to. It was like build a school or something, but he basically goes and spends all the money, and he gives them this spiel about, you're investing in the future. And they're coming back like, hey man, like we're being told by the bishop, we have to get at least some of this 350 grand that we gave you. And he basically, politely steamrolls them and gets them out of his office every time, and they never get their money back.
Right.
So yeah, it kind of if that gives you an idea. And so Reverend Bacon is the one. So the mother of the woman, the mother of the kid who gets hit by the car, she is part of Reverend Bacon's congregation. And so when they, start figuring out what's going on here, she initially doesn't want to talk to the cops and the ADA because she has a bunch of unpaid parking tickets. She's scared she's going to get arrested for it. So they make this deal. Okay, fine. Like, we're not going to take you in for the parking tickets. But because the thing is, when her son gets hit, he initially goes to the hospital and he doesn't tell them he tells them he like fell and hurt his wrist or something. So they treat him for his broken, for his broken or fractured or sprained or whatever it was wrist, and send him away. And so then he wakes up the next day and tells his mother that he had gotten hit by a car. It was a Mercedes. It started, the license plate started with R, and then it might have been P or B or some other letter or number or something. And so then he goes into a coma. And so there's this kind of it's referenced more in the film, but there's this kind of sense that that Bacon and this guy's, and the lawyer who's working on behalf of Henry Lamb is the kid who got hit, that they're going to sue the hospital because they see this as like, oh, well, he had a head injury and you didn't treat him for that. And it's like, well, they can't treat people for things that, they don't know to look for. But anyway, so yeah, it's basically that they're going to sue this guy. They're trying to sue anybody. Basically, is Henry's lawyer is effectively just an ambulance chaser. He's that type. But then, so his lawyer, I think Al Vogel is his name. He gives this story to this guy named Peter Fallow, who is this British, ostensibly a journalist who works for this publication called the City Light, which is a tabloid, it's like a Page Six, right? If you're all familiar with Page Six, the kind of tabloid rag that just traffics in gossip. And this guy's a drunk. He never shows up to work. He's the kind, like, every day he's like, oh yeah, I'm going to start working out tomorrow and I'm not going to drink tonight. And then, he'll go out and basically con people, not con, but him and his friends have this thing they'll do, because they're all Brits. They hate Americans. They're very superior about it. And so they'll basically find some American and like sucker them into the conversation, run up a huge bar tab, and then they'll all leave one by one and stick this guy with the tab, whoever this American is, at the end of the night. So, I don't. Do you have anything you want to add on to any of that?
Yeah, these guys, they are. Why does this tab keep opening? I'm sorry.
Very good.
Yeah, they are expats du jour. They close, dude. They the way that they have this like little scam going, it's rakish, right? It's it's like they're gentlemen, but they're running a scam, right? Which has the sort of veneer of being a rake, right? They're expat, Englishmen or whatever, and yellow journalists at a time when that was so prevalent and huge. Now that's like all gone, and it's all gone, but that is the entire internet now, right?
Yeah.
In terms of like the gossip column and I mean, whatever. But the pastor and his scam is interesting because it fits into a type, and this is still true. I mean, this happens every time. There, of course, now it's in the universe of SJW, riots and like serious action. But you can see the beginnings of this, and also how this is inherited from. This is set in the 60s, but there's a lot, or in the 80s, but there's a lot of like the 60s in this book.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard to put your finger on how, but it's like the entire society sort of grew out of what the 60s germinated. The people in the book are, they're adults and they're in their 40s, I guess, but that would mean that they were youths during the tumultuous times of the 60s when they were still elites and all that. But it's just like Hunter S. Thompson, you can see the crest of the high and beautiful wave and how it comes to be the 1980s. And I watched an interview with Tom Wolfe. I don't usually do this, but I watched an interview with Tom Wolfe and William F. Buckley on Firing Line, which was hilarious. It was so funny because the thing starts, William F. Buckley, it starts and he's sitting there like this and he's like, well, and he's trying to have a rebuttal against every little point that Tom Wolfe makes, and they're stupid points. So Tom Wolfe is like, well, this is about the excesses of the 80s. And William Buckley's like, well, yes, that was in New York, but it was all over the world. So what's your point with this? And he's like, I don't have a point. I'm just saying that's what the book is about. And he's like, yes, but, they were doing this in London and Europe. And it's like, so what? It's when you watch the interview, it is very funny that this was like TV content. William F. Buckley Jr. here to steer the CIA into the sewer line, as AJ says. And Buckley was like, he was surface level, legit CIA, station chief, Mexico City. At least Howard Hunt says that. And, and so, he's talking about culture creation, and maybe his beef is that Tom Wolfe is not CIA, or I don't know what his beef is, but it's very strange. But anyway, in the interview, Wolfe says that the book is essentially about how the 80s is a particular time in history that is unlike any other time that's ever come to be. There are other periods in history where there were like magnificent excesses, but there was never a time when like the average person could, an electrician in New York could afford to like go to the Cayman Islands and spend tons of money and have a Mercedes. And it was excess. Everybody knows the 80s was excess. That's what it was. And so he's like, the point of the book is like to kind of point that out and to just show what it was on a basic level with all these different types of people. And of course, the 80s excesses came out of the 60s excesses.
Mm-hmm.
So, one leads right to the other. The 70s is like a reactionary period where people are kind of, the wealthy people kind of hide it a little bit. But in the 80s, it was out in the open. right? It was the limos and gold and, Central Park apartments and Concords and big hair and just everything about it was huge.
Yeah.
So the pastor character is pretty insightful because that hasn't gone away. It's just turned into something even more serious with even more of a direct, direct, it has a direct line to social issues and action taken today, right now.
Mm-hmm.
Because we all know that anything could happen at any time, and that guy with the gold chains and the tracksuit could come out and he'd be the guy, and there would be wide implications in society from that. It would happen.
Yeah.
So
yeah, what's interesting is the way one of the big themes in this book is the media and how the media, the role here actually made, and I don't know, hopefully this note will be interesting. Let me look at this. I'd made a note that said consuming media as if it were food. So Kramer, the assistant district attorney, when he's getting ready to go to work in the morning, and they're watching. So when the book opened with that the ill-fated town hall that the mayor had, I think it was it in Harlem or maybe it was the Bronx. I don't remember which one, but
it was Harlem.
It was Harlem. Okay, yeah. And so he actually mentions that because he's watching the Today Show, and he mentions it. This is what America was having for breakfast this morning: a snootful of the people of Harlem rising up in their righteous wrath and driving the white mayor off the stage in a public hall. And so one of the things with the media is that, like with Fallow, the British tabloid journalist we were just talking about, he goes and finds, because when he gets on this Henry Lamb story about the kid who gets hit, Henry's the kid who gets hit by the car, he goes and finds this guy's teacher, her former teacher, who's living out, I think, on Long Island or something. And the teacher doesn't even remember the kid. He's like, I don't know who that is. And then he finally, he asked him, well, was he a good student? Was he an honor student? And, he asked him about like the curriculum, and the guy, he says this in the movie, and I think he says it in the book too. It's I don't know if I have a note here. I think so. But anyway, basically he's talking, the guy the teacher is talking about how the school system in the Bronx is just in shambles. And it's like, look, we're just trying to, and so he actually says at one point, because he asked me if he was like an honor student, he's like, look, if he shows up to class, doesn't cause trouble, then yeah, that counts as being an honor student in the Bronx. And so then it becomes over and over and over. They mention, just because Fallow puts us in the article, that Henry was an honor student. So then that gets repeated over and over. There's no actual evidence. Nobody bothers to fact check if if Henry's actually an honor student. It's just that Fallow says it in the article based on something he kind of twisted from what the teacher said. And another thing with that,
the teacher said the words honor student, so that's enough to say it, to quote him saying it in the article. And by the way, what he says about the school system and about that student is so unbelievably true in terms of the United States education system. It's almost weird that he says this in a book published in the 80s, and now it's 2023, and this could be written today. It's the exact same. It's crazy how prescient the teacher's response is to that student. I'm not saying that that is always the case, or the teachers tend to say that sort of thing, but just the general tone of how he responds to the question is pretty insightful and prescient.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, that's a good point. And yeah, I mean, along those lines with the media there's a point where they have a rally in the Bronx. I think it was outside of the apartment building where Henry lived with his mother. And so they're basically, they get these people who, there's like a LGBT rights group that shows up, and then there's like these communist people that show up to any protest anytime, whenever, no matter what's going on. And So the media is there to, so the Bacon, I think Reverend Bacon, he calls Peter Fallow to cover this, and then also this TV journalist, who the TV journalist actually in his name is Corso, and in the movie he's played by Geraldo Rivera, which is kind of funny. There's some interesting cameos in that film, but. And so with the media, this reminded me, just to go off on a quick tangent here, to see how this is still related is I was listening to an episode of, I think it was Tinfoil Hat recently, and Sam Tripoli was talking about when he was in, I think it was Portland. And, this is when all like the riots are going on, and they were showing on the news, like, oh, the whole city's being burned down, which, like, and I'm not downplaying the destruction, because there were cities that got messed up really bad, but just point being is that with the media, it's this idea that there's riots everywhere. So he was like, I think he was talking about he'd done a comedy show there, and he was like, well, let's go find a riot. So he said they went like wandering around Portland, they never could find one. And when that was going on, to hear people talking, people were acting like the whole city was a war zone, and it's like, well, no, that's not true. And so the reason I bring that up is because we have. Because the way things are framed, that can be important, obviously, and the way that the media shows things, but what's interesting with this though is that basically the people show up and stand around until the news people are like, okay, yeah, we're ready to go, we're ready to roll, we're ready to shoot. And they're like working with the news people, but okay, what kind of shots can we get? How do we want to do this? How's this going to play out? And so these people, they have their signs, or picket signs, placards, whatever, and they're just standing around. And then it's like, all right, now we're rolling, and now everybody's got their signs up, they're yelling, they're marching around,
in other
and
words, it's a depiction in real time in the book of crisis actors.
Yes.
And an organized action with the proto Tifa people, right, and Skittles people, all of the different groups, they're put there, and they're given a role. And I mean, even the Geraldo character in the movie, it's like the media gets involved, print media gets involved, because it's the 80s. So now it would be, bloggers or whatever. And they're specifically brought there, and they're told, this is what's going to happen, and this is what you're going to do, because this will be the result. And this is going to result in monetary damages, right? Which is going to benefit. I mean, it's obviously going to benefit Bacon, the pastor. He's going to get a huge cut of this somehow. He's going to get a donation to his cause or whatever, right, from the mother. And this is the playbook. It's funny that you said, I mean, shouts out to Tripoli. It's funny that Sam was talking about that, because Chaz Chop, you remember when that was going on?
Oh, yeah.
In Portland. I mean, so the media now does one of two polar opposite things. Either the thing is happening and they don't cover it, or it's not happening and they are covering the block of the city where something is happening.
Mm-hmm.
So we saw in 2020, we saw the first thing, right? Which was this stuff was happening like in every city. You remember how long it took for them to cover stuff?
Oh, yeah.
Right. I mean, the Chaz Chop thing was happening. That was a thing. And it was, no, these are, what did they call them? It was peaceful protesters.
Yeah.
And, they're here to talk about, the spread of democracy and how that's healthy.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And exercising, social justice rights. But everybody else needs to stay home because of Karanka. I mean, that was the thing. Like, it's not even worth talking about, because it was like, but it is interesting how everyone's forgotten about it for the most part. Not anyone here, but outside, it's like that never even happened. What are you talking about? I mean, I remember at the time when the cities were burning, London, Paris, Madrid, New York, Portland, Pittsburgh, all the cities, my own city, downtown, was on fire, and it took 3 days for the legitimate MSM to even mention it, much less show video or cover it. It's like, oh no, we're talking about the Karanka numbers in Italy. That's
right.
What's happening. So this was an interesting scene that he put into this book, and the fact that he depicted it in the way that he did, in an objective bystander way, was pretty inventive and interesting. What did KF say?
Oh, it was a fiery but mostly peaceful summer of love.
That's right. Yeah. Yep. Summer of love. Speaking of summer of love in the 60s, this is a small point, but most people think that the summer of love in the 60s was 1969. You know, most people think that because of Woodstock, but it wasn't.
It was 67, wasn't it?
It was 67.
Yeah.
And the number one song in the summer of love, 1967, "Light My Fire" by the Doors.
I'd forgotten about it. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's always interesting. Everybody thinks it was 69. But I was like, no, it was 67. So
and also that song not written by Jim Morrison. Lyrics,
really,
Robbie Krieger wrote that song.
I did not know that. I'm not a Doors fan, so I don't. I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah, he wrote it, and he said, if it's going to be a song that sounds like something you've written, it's got to be about snakes, lizards, or fire. So made it about fire and rhymed it with funeral pyre.
There you go.
Yeah.
So yeah, the media. Just one other quick thing about the 2020 Summer of Love is this. Well, yeah, since you mentioned it took so long for the MSM to acknowledge that something was going on. One of the things that was most interesting was watching this happen in real time was when, there's that classic screen cap of, this huge, like it looks like a whole city or half a city block just in inferno behind that reporter. And it's the thing at the bottom, whatever it's called, Chiron or whatever it is like,
mostly peaceful.
And then the thing is that I remember watching this live is when that big group of people showed up to the CNN offices in Atlanta, and then it's like Chris Cuomo was like, oh, are you okay? Like, then it was all concerned when it's literally at their front door. And it's like, oh yeah, it's totally fine. And now granted, he was in New York City, they were in Atlanta, but it's like until it arrived at their front door, it's like, oh no, yeah, we're going to talk about, how you can't, but anyway, I don't want to get on a tangent about
remember
COVID, but it's like, you can't get this if you go to one of these protests where you're running up on the CNN offices. But if you go to anything else, if you go to a restaurant and you don't have your mask on walking from the table to the drink station, then, you're going to kill grandma or whatever. But
you remember the pallets of bricks?
Yeah. Adam just mentioned that in the chat, actually. Yes. That was very interesting.
Yeah. Right by CNN.
Yeah.
And then remember Rand Paul getting mobbed on the way back from that restaurant.
I forgot about that.
Yeah, that was hardcore. I mean, remember the CNN reporters reporting on the mostly peaceful actions, and then like the camera guy got knocked in the head, and then the reporter got kicked. I mean, well, whatever, man. It was. I watched. I was dialed into that in a way that I don't know. I guess probably everybody was, or maybe they weren't, but I'll never forget that stuff. I'll never forget it. And not only around the world, but in my own city. So
yeah,
flames and smoke going over the house. That was a scurry time.
It was pretty gnarly. I can imagine, especially being that close to it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so eventually they figure out that because the cops come to, and this is what I was talking about earlier with the cops, the detectives rather, Martin and Goldberg. They show up to check because they find out, they get this long list. Somebody inside the DMV gives them a list and says, here's all these people with Mercedes who have license plates that start with R, and then the next letter is like P or B or whatever. And so they go to McCoy's apartment, and they're just asking, like, and so they show up, and then McCoy, like, he has this whole thing where he's agonizing over what should I wear to go down and see the cops. Do I want to because he comes home from work, falls asleep for like a half hour, and then he gets woken up by his nanny or maid or whoever it is that wakes him up, says that there's detectives downstairs. And so he's like, oh, well, I don't want to look too casual. Should I put my full suit back on and the tie and everything? And so he's like agonizing over this, finally decides to put his whole suit, tie, everything.
By the way, he makes the common mistake that they always make, which is that he goes down and he talks to them. Why do you go down and talk to them? Why?
Yeah.
It's hubris.
Yes. Yeah, because I think he thinks that he thinks he's a lot more slick than he actually is.
Yeah.
And so he makes a mistake, goes down, makes the cops wait for like 15 minutes. I guess I don't know if he's trying to seem more important or whatever, but he goes down, talks to them, and they're, and they mention this later, that they didn't think that he had done it. Like, they're thinking, okay, this guy lives on Park Avenue in like a $3 million apartment. Like, this guy's he's not the one who was driving. But then when they ask him to see the car, then he gets in this whole thing where they're like, oh, it's just a normal procedure kind of thing. And then he freaks out and is like, has this whole thing where he's stumbling over his words, goes on for like a paragraph about following the proper procedure. And that's when they start getting suspicious. So they kind of start putting the screws to him. They're in the library, and one of the cops sits on the desk, and which, offends McCoy. And he kind of, is sort of making fun of him, like, oh, he's not exactly reading him his Miranda rights, but he's saying that, you do have a right to remain silent. And, if you want an attorney, you can get one. And if you can't afford, if you don't have the funds for one, we can get, basically, like messing with him. And he takes the bait and just completely falls apart, and then tells them they can't look at the car. And
what an idiot.
Yeah, just complete moron.
First of all, when the thing happened, why not just report it? Just say it, right? Insulate yourself and say what happened.
Yeah.
Right. It was an accident. The thing was an accident. And also it was the lady anyway.
Right.
Right. Not that it matters at that point, but it's like, no, it was just an accident, whatever happened. But then by trying to hide it and conceal it, and it's just this series of events that show that this guy's going to fall. He's going to fall from a great height, but it's not tragic. It's not going to be tragic, because he's described as larger than life and a master of the universe, but it's obviously hyperbolic and ironic, and we have no sympathy for this dude because of how he acts in regular company, right? With regular human beings. It's like, dude, you're just a guy, man.
Yeah.
And the thing about the driving in the car, it's like he could have gotten out of it easily, because there's no reason why this dude would be driving his own car around Manhattan.
Yeah.
It's rare, and it doesn't happen. Also, the thing with the license plate, it's like you would think that it would be hard to find the license plate, but there are only so many cars in Manhattan that aren't taxis and that are like Mercedes. So it would be identifiable. And this guy's obviously going to fold, and he does. Moron.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is that he thinks that, really, the two things on this is, one is that he's more scared, because I was saying earlier, like it's almost like he's scared of women and he's intimidated by them. And because he's more afraid that if he if they were to go to the cops, like, he's more scared of his affair, his wife finding out about his affair with Maria, than he is about, like getting in trouble for this with the cops. And one thing with what you were just saying about him being a master of the universe is, I hadn't picked up on this before, but I just had this thought that in a way he kind of reminds me of Bill in Eyes Wide Shut, in that he thinks he's somebody. He's got some money. He's doing well by most people's standards. He's, wealthy, but even though that sort of higher echelon of people isn't talked about in this book, as far as the Bonfire of the Vanities goes, he is the top, because there's nobody above him ever mentioned. But he is that same kind of character where he thinks he's a lot more important, influential, when in reality, because like when he eventually goes to trial for, and he's going to get arrested for his role in hitting hitting Henry with the car is like his boss has basically already forgotten about him because like he goes and tells his boss like I'm going to be arrested, and his boss like keeps taking phone calls and is more concerned with this, you know, opera singer from Kentucky or wherever, or West Virginia, wherever it is, who's taking his private plane somewhere. He's more concerned with that. And McCoy actually like basically says in the book, he realizes he's disposable, that as soon as he leaves Pierce and Pierce, like as soon as he walks out the door, they've completely forgotten about him because there are, you know, millions of other 30-something-year-old guys who will come in and work hard, who are striving to
there's a
achieve what he has.
Whole feeding frenzy of sharks under him that want to do exactly what he's doing and probably better, right? And the competition is going to breed, you know, results with the money. That's an excellent point about Oswald Shutt and Bill, because, you know, it's like this guy goes down and talks to the cops, right? Just like Bill goes and talks to the hooker on the street, and he goes to the costume shop, and he's like, you know, he's low. He thinks he's high, but he's low, and he just lust is his weakness, and he wants in on this secret thing.
Yeah.
But you imagine, like, you think Ziegler, like would talk to the police? Like Ziegler owns the newspaper and probably the higher echelons of the police establishment. He probably controls the money for the police union. Like, this guy doesn't talk to cops. He owns them, right? I mean, so there's just there. Bill is one. He thinks he's at Ziegler's level, but he's not. He's clearly not. And Ziegler kind of, you know, points that out to him at the end in as graceful a manner as he can. But you're right. It is kind of exactly the same that Sherman, you know, for one, like, he makes commission on his bond dealings or whatever, and he's in this gigantic room with everybody else. Like, the top guys aren't in that room. The top guys are. So I'll tell you a side story here. So one of my dad's classmates at school was this guy, Stanley Druckenmiller. Have you ever heard of this guy? Stanley Druckenmiller went off to Wall Street, and he's the guy who broke the Bank of England working for Soros.
Oh, wow.
He got a job in the 80s working under Soros, and he's just a Wall Street guy, I guess. I don't know how he, you know, what happened or whatever, but he, it was his deal, and he's the one who shorted the Bank of England, and they made, I don't know how much money they made on that one day, but it's a legendary Wall Street day. And like, so that guy then became the guy who's not in the room with all these other guys, right? By doing stuff like that. Of course, he started off as just a regular, you know, he's a stockbroker or whatever, just like everybody else. But, you know, Sherman, like, dude, you are not going to get up there. Like, you know, you're too worried about these women. And, you know, in a way, this book reminds me of the Michael Crichton book. What's it called? Rising Sun. Have you ever read that book?
No.
There's a film version with Sean Connery, Wesley Snipes. And that's about, like, the Japanese financial raiders in the early 90s. And it's in LA. And what happens is there's a murder that takes place and all this stuff. But what it's really about is, like, the corporate war between the Americans and the Japanese. And this book kind of reminds me of the characters in that book, because the thing that the Japanese characters in that book fear the most is losing face, right? It's this cultural, you know, it's like, it's this shame it's dishonorable and it's worse than death. And that's why they commit, you know, harakiri or whatever. And Sherman, it's like, he would be that type of guy because he has a concept of, like, he doesn't want to be ashamed, you know, and caught out in front of his wife, but he has no concept of, like, the honorable reasons for it, right? Or even that he's done something sneaky and underhanded. He just doesn't want to be caught, and so he doesn't want to be exposed. But, like, he's not gonna, he's not going to take some honorable way out of that. He's just going to take whatever they give him and just go on and be some loser.
Yeah.
Which is what happens.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting too with the going back to the media. And Thomas said in the chats, Soros made over £1.5 billion by shortchanging the British currency. What's interesting, jumping ahead, but one point about McCoy and how insecure he is like he takes all these things. People will say things that are just innocuous, and he'll take it personally. So, like for example, his daughter they're out like at Long Island. Him and his wife, they're with his parents. His daughter's playing with the kids of one of his colleagues, and so his daughter runs up and she's like, what do you do for a living? And so he's trying to, and his daughter, I think, is 6, and he's trying to explain bonds, which I'll be straight up with y'all. I don't understand bonds. Like they actually say in the book that, people like you shouldn't explain it to people in their 20s or even 30s because it doesn't make sense. And so his daughter runs up. She's like, well, what do you do? And so they're trying to explain bonds to a 6-year-old. And so his wife is making this analogy where she's like, okay, so, if you're going to like build, because they're trying to use this example, like if you're going to build a road that, excuse me, he doesn't actually build roads, but it's, he gets the money to build the roads. And so his wife makes this analogy about like, if you have a cake, right, and you didn't make the cake, but you're like taking slices off of it.
You didn't make that cake. You didn't build that by God. You didn't make that
cake. Nicely done.
If you're going to buy a $65,000 pizza, oh, that's terrible. I shouldn't say that. You didn't know that.
And so she's saying that, if you're giving out slices of this and then crumbs will fall off of it. And that's basically what Sherman does, is like pick up the crumbs. And it's just an analogy, but he takes it personally because he's like, oh, so and this is kind of his internal monologue where he's saying, oh, she's saying that I'm just making crumbs. And I think he calls her out on it. And she's like, look, it's just an analogy, like settle down. But he gets really worked up over this. And yeah, so what ties in with that is with the media is later on is because the whole trial becomes a media circus. And so people actually start talking about him as if he is as if he is on a like a Ziegler from Eyes Wide Shut kind of level. People see him as being the top of the socioeconomic food chain, which I think, as we've demonstrated pretty clearly, is he's not. He's not anywhere close to that. But for people who, are just normal kind of everyday people who don't make, almost $1 million a year, that they don't, that they see him as being at the top. But the thing is that he actually doesn't have that much money because he's banking on this deal because he's on the verge of going underwater financially. And so he's trying to close this deal so he can get enough money to pay off his apartment because, and I don't remember the exact numbers, but they go into talking about his bank account and they say how much money's in there, how much is in savings. And it's basically that taking out, because he has to pay $10,000 because his attorney used to be a prosecutor with the Bronx District Attorney. So he knows people inside. They get this deal where his bail is only going to be $10,000. And that's about to drain his account, is just getting $10,000 out to pay for bail.
Yeah, so it has all the hallmarks of running some sort of Ponzi scheme, right? I mean, if he can't afford his apartment and the 10 grand for him is going to put him underwater, like he's in a bad place.
Yeah.
For all the money that he's making, he's hemorrhaging money because he's an idiot loser who's just running scams and barely trying to make it.
And he also won't stand up to his wife because his wife is basically a socialite who wants to be an interior designer. So she goes and blows tons of money on furnishing their apartment. And I think it's never explicitly said, but I think it's mentioned at one point that she did the apartment of a friend of theirs, and so it's implied that that's the only client she's ever had. So it's not like she's bringing in money with that, and so it's because he won't put
She's
his
used to a standard of living. I actually
yeah.
know I know an older someone that this sort of something similar to this happened to. This dude was a guy in society who did all the stuff, but it turns out that he was like just running a scheme, and then he got caught out, and he went to financial federal prison. And his wife, who was a socialite older lady, was just like this, like used to a standard of living, and was living in the most expensive condo with the most expensive house with oriental rugs everywhere. Like they were never aware of the illusion that they were running on, even after he went to prison, which is crazy. And then and he got out, and I think everything's back to the way it was, which is also insane. But yeah, so it's interesting how Tom Wolfe uses this as his, as the action in the narrative, because it's obviously very common. I mean, look at Wolf of Wall Street. That's like different types of people. Those are low people who are masquerading as, big shots, but they're just running a out and out scam. But it's like, it must be so common for these Wall Street people. It must be so easy with, like Matthew McConaughey says, the numbers, they're just digits. They're just digits in the air, man. Right. When it's that much money all the time, and it's just like, it must just become like nothing. And so they just take these huge risks, and then stuff like this happens.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's that, yeah, I think that sense that things are always going to be this way, that, he's, and one thing that's interesting, and it shows you where McCoy is in sort of the ladder, is I know in the film they talk about specific numbers. I think they do in the book as well. I just don't know what they are off the top of my head. But in the film, at least, it's mentioned that this big deal he's trying to close, which it's some French bond or something, and it's based on like this one thing not going below us. It's like gold or with the French currency, whatever it was, not going below. This is pre-Euro, I guess, not going below a certain number or something. And in the film, it's mentioned this is like a $600 million deal, and McCoy is going to come away with, I think, 1.3 million of that. Now, that's a lot of money. Don't get me wrong, but that is like a fraction of the amount of money that this deal is. And again, I don't know how all that works. I don't claim to understand, the bond markets and all that. But to me, I think that says that, when you have over $500 million deal and he's getting 1.3 million off of it, that's that kind of, I think, is an indication of where he is in the grand scheme of Wall Street.
Yeah, the fact that it's centered around bonds is also, I mean, you brought that up earlier, and I whatever, but I do know that it's like, you consider this against the movie Wall Street, Oliver Stone's Wall Street, right? Which is about, I guess, what is Gordon Gekko? Is he a hedge fund guy? He's a corporate raider.
So.
Yeah. So he must just be like an axe character in that show. Have you ever seen that show, Billions?
I've heard about it, but I haven't watched it yet.
It's not bad. The first 2 seasons are pretty good, because it centers around these types of people and this type of thing. Of course, he runs a hedge fund, and it shows that the people who do this are like psychopathic in pretty much all the hallmark ways. And of course, he made his money on a certain day in September in 2001 because he saw all the things happening with the planes, and so he bought up a bunch of stuff having to do with that, which is seen as horrendous for people to know that, but is perfectly legal.
Yeah.
And of course, he's got some kind of inside, like, beforehand knowledge, which apparently people did, but this guy's got no inside knowledge. He's just like he's just the guy doing the regular job. And like you said, the regular normal people on the street, especially the people who like see a tire in the street and pick up the tire, and like they're in the Bronx and they just want to like put the tire on their car and get home. To them, these people, like, if they wronged you, then of course, if there's legal action to be taken, they're going to take it, because this is like, they could never dream of something like this, right?
Mhm.
I mean, for people like that, like $10 an hour is like a good amount of money to get paid in the 80s.
Oh yeah.
So like, making some sort of, getting an ambulance chaser and suing this guy or suing the hospital, and with the prospect of winning is like, that's otherworldly. Everybody's seen the meme of like the woman, somebody hits her car and there's like a guy walking by and he like jumps into the lady's car and he's like, my neck.
Yeah.
Wants to get in on it, right? Or that
And
song that Mersh plays, hit me with your car. You ever heard that song?
yeah. Yeah, that's evidenced by so McCoy gets, after all this, after he gets arrested and gets arraigned and gets out on bail, he goes to take it because his daughter goes to some, I guess, expensive prep school or whatever it is. I don't know if they go to prep school at 6, whatever. I don't know this stuff, but I was homeschooled. I don't know these things. But she, so he gets mobbed by reporters, and like Tom Wolfe was not very kind to the press in this book, and rightfully so, because most people who work in that arm of media are I mean, I think he calls them parasites. They get called parasites. They get called like, not hyenas, but it's something like I think they're compared to animals multiple times, and they're just mobbing this guy and his daughter, and they're like trying to get photos of her and just being very weird. So this woman, like, I think she like sticks I can't remember if it's a camera or microphone or something, like right in McCoy's face. He like, puts his arm up to knock it away from her. And so then she freaks out and says, oh, you assaulted me. I'm going to sue you for $500,000. And she like files a $500,000 lawsuit. When the guy's got, what is, I don't know, like 80,000 in the bank or something.
Right.
And so one thing that's worth mentioning, I actually forgotten to mention, is that this case is big because the district attorney, Abe Weiss, in the Bronx he's been accused of there being, there's a lot of accusations of, well, there's two systems of justice, rich white people on, Park Avenue, they don't get in trouble for this kind of stuff. But if somebody from the Bronx had come and run over a kid on Park Avenue, you'd be bringing the hammer down on him. And so Abe Weiss is up for re-election. And so this is one of those things where this becomes a huge deal for them, because he's like, oh, we have to prosecute this because I have to get re-elected. Because he's probably the most like neurotic, paranoid. Like, this guy has 4 TVs, a set of 4 TVs in his office, so he can play all the footage of where he's either been on the news or talked about on the news. Like, he is obsessed with seeing what the media is saying about him, and he's getting like sabotaged by his aides. He's not like AIDS, like the disease, but like the people who work for him.
So isn't this like a Giuliani type? Wasn't Giuliani the DA in the southern district of Manhattan where this is taken? But the DA is, that's a political position that every DA that has that position wants to go on and be mayor of New York and then governor and then senator, etc. Right.
Right.
So in the film, I think, is it F. Murray Abraham who plays this character?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, who, by the way, is like perfect in this role. He's like you said, he's neurotic. He's politically minded. He's like, self-consciously Machiavellian, as these guys always are, it seems. Billions, again, is Paul Giamatti has that role. And
great actor.
Yeah. And he plays the, arch villain to the financial Billions guy, Axe, who's the hedge fund guy. they're arch enemies. And so, of course, he's going to use this. He's going to use this guy as the sacrificial victim to elevate his political position. But the problem is that this guy also is like, everyone hates him too.
Right.
Like when he goes to the thing in Harlem and he has the town hall and like they chase him out of there. Right. He's obviously he has no, but then again, in reality, these people, it doesn't matter whether they are genuine or real or have any actual values or anything, because people don't, in the end, they forget all the things and they don't care. I mean, look at what's the guy, Wilhelm, the old mayor of New York.
George Wilhelm or what? Bill de Blasio.
Yeah, de Blasio, that guy. I mean, look at that guy, right? That guy is like a literal, like, alien, right?
It's like this bloodless, creepy little ghoul from another planet.
What do they call this again? This is a cheeseburger. Yes, this is a good cheeseburger. If you eat this, we'll give you a free one of these if you get the stabby, right? You can't go to Central Park, by the way, but I got to go there, but you can't go there. I mean, that guy's like wearing a human skin suit. Did you see the thing with him recently?
Which thing was this?
Well, he's not mayor anymore and he dyed his hair black and he is separating from his wife, which is, I'm sorry that happened, but his wife, before they got married, apparently is a self-proclaimed Skittles person. And they were married all this time. And, this de Blasio is like his third name.
Yeah.
And even though they're separated, they're going to cohabitate and they're going to see other partners, but they're still going to cohabitate because their reason is that, they're going to show what, adults can be like and that they can get over their differences and still, be grown-ups.
So they're basically like, they're trying to do polyamory, but put a nice veneer on it.
Yes. And to me, I mean, Mersh and Royce brought this up, that is he a Skittles man? I think he's just Skittles. Like that's
he might be.
Yeah, because what other reason is there? Like her reason for this was, when he was mayor, it was very stressful. And it's like, well, yeah, I mean, it would be like mayor of New York. You would think you would know what you're getting into. That seems like a weird reason for this to happen.
Yeah.
But anyway, whatever. That's like the prototype for this kind of character, I think.
Just a quick side note about George Wilhelm de Blasio's wife is, I have this, I'm not going to pull it up, but I have the screenshot on my phone. I think it was New Year's Eve or it was the New Year's Eve, I think, going into 2021. There is a photo of the two of them in New York City, and she has on a black face mask, and there's like these multicolored, I'm sure, got to be careful how I talk about this, but I'm sure we've all seen the FBI put out symbols that creepers use to communicate, and there's that one, it's like the triangle that kind of, it's almost like a swirl. Her face mask is covered in those. And so I'm not accusing her of doing anything illegal, but anything evil, but that is very curious that she would wind up with a face mask with that very specific symbol all over it.
Well, you're saying that she was following the public direction, right?
Yes.
Those things, and she was doing what was appropriate at the time, and that it had some sort of fashionable thing. She just probably just bought it somewhere, and that's whatever, right? That's all you're saying.
Yeah, picked up at the bodega on the corner, most likely.
The same symbol that appeared in, I did Flight of the Navigator analysis of that 80s movie, which is about the thing that happened at the restaurant in DC.
Yeah.
Is the sort of subtext of that movie, and that is a prominent symbol in that movie. And that is like you said, that is what has come out as a symbol for those people. And of course, there she is. So that, I mean, it's not surprising at all. It's like, that seems to be what these people, that's what they do. That's how they have their thing.
Yeah.
Oh man,
Eric makes an interesting point. I don't know if you know anything about this. He says that de Blasio's uncle worked for the CIA in Iran. Have you heard anything about this?
No, I haven't heard that. It doesn't surprise me, but who is his uncle?
I actually don't know. I have to look it up.
I mean, I know Obama's dad was the guy he was the company man in like what, the Philippines at the time.
I think so.
But yeah, that doesn't surprise me at all.
But yeah, so and an interesting point, just to jump back into the plot for to kind of wrap up the plot of this, and then obviously we can take this wherever in terms of themes, and I don't know how long you want to go for, but yeah, so the bigger guy that we were talking about who was there when he was hit, there's this issue because Weiss, the district attorney, had just been saying that this kid had, say he was a kid, Roland Auburn was his name. So Roland had gotten picked up in like a crack raid because he was selling crack. And I think Weiss at a press conference had called him like the crack kingpin or the king of crack or something like that. And so then he comes forward and gives an alternate take on an alternate story about what happened and how McCoy ran over how Maria had hit Henry. And so Kramer like just jumps on this, and he kind of goes through this like rationalizing, like, oh, this is our star witness. He's just misunderstood. He's a good kid. And, he wouldn't, he's honest and he's doing this. And really, he's just doing it to try to get out, to get on lesser charges because he's facing some potentially pretty serious jail time. And so, and so he kind of comes in and this is where who Kramer is, this is where it really starts to come through. And because he starts getting invited, because initially he's, sitting at his desk, because what's interesting is all these people, him and the other two prosecutors in this office, like all these people talk about the Bronx but all these people, I don't think Tom Wolfe basically says that all these people are terrified of the Bronx, that they all will, they'll order lunch in every day because even in broad daylight, they're too scared to go outside and go get lunch and go sit in a restaurant, to go sit on a bench. And so, yeah, there's like this fear of these people. And there later on in the book, there's this whole passage where this whole kind of monologue that Weiss gives to Kramer, because Kramer, he starts getting invited to, lunches like in the district attorney's office. He starts thinking, and it doesn't explicitly say this, but in my take on it, he starts thinking that he's on his way up because now the district attorney is inviting him. He's going to meetings in the DA's office. He's going in there with the DAs, watching 20 minutes of news coverage about himself. And so there's this whole like speech that Weiss gives to Kramer about how the Irish used to run the Bronx, and then then it became the Jews and the Italians, and they run the Bronx now, and then eventually the people who are Black and Puerto Rican who make up most of the demographics of the Bronx, is like eventually they'll eventually they'll kind of run this place. And it's this very sort of like, it's almost like an imperialist and colonialist kind of mindset where he says, oh, sometimes people get out of line and we basically have to shepherd them back into line. And he's basically sanitizing what they're doing, because he says in there that poverty breeds crime. But the thing is, and I don't know about recidivism rates in the 80s, but I know about, I can't tell you hard numbers, but recidivism rates, which is, people who you get arrested, go to prison, you wind up getting arrested again, going back, you keep getting incarcerated over and over. That's what they're doing to these people. And so it's this, he's sort of sanitizing um, their role in all of this. And so it's kind of like, oh, we're looking out the window over all these people, and we're sort of their protectors and all that. Um, but they're terrified of them. Like, I can't even. Where interestingly, Kovitsky, the judge in this case, in the case of McCoy, getting arrested for this, he's the only one who has any. I don't want to say courage, because that sounds bad, but like, he's the only, because some of these people in the Bronx, they are antagonistic towards the legal system, and you could say rightfully so. That's the debate we're not going to get into here, but he's the only one that is willing to at least stand up for himself. And so he's the one who, comes down hard, but he comes down hard on everybody. It's not just the defendants, because later on, when Kramer is arguing for, trying, because so there's this whole sequence where, just a good quick to get back to this. So they find Peter Fallow, the journalist, he finds out that from one of his the people he hangs out with at this bar they go to all the time, this restaurant, that she tells him that Maria was in the car with Sherman. So he goes to dinner with Maria's husband. Guy ends up having a heart attack, dying. So then after the wedding, or after the funeral, excuse me, McCoy goes to try to talk to her. He's wearing a wire. She discovers the wire on him and flips out. And so then she turns against him and testifies to whatever Kramer wants her to say. And so then there's this whole sequence where this guy like comes into the apartment that she was subletting. And that was kind of weird. It's like, what's going on here? Comes to find out that guy was bugging the apartment on behalf of the landlord, because the landlord was trying to get people who have rent-controlled apartments. He's trying to get them out, because he's only getting $331 out of that a month. Meanwhile, the person who rents it is renting it out for $700 and something a month. So anyway,
everyone's running a scam. And everyone has multiple angles against everyone else.
Yes.
Multiple shady ways. It's crazy. And the bugging thing is crazy, because she pretty much immediately, thinks that he's bugged, because he's terrible at hiding it or being normal. And it also puts into perspective the fact that, if this were now, like, he would just carry his cell phone like a normal person, and that's already bugged.
Yeah.
Right. Everyone's phone is automatically a microphone. And so the whole bugging thing just is like completely moot now, which is crazy. But everyone has some sort of scam against everyone else. And just really quickly, you mentioned his daughter earlier. And, his wife, I guess, does his wife come from money? I assume that her family is old money, at least the way that she acts like a debutante, which is what Tom Wolfe says.
It's mentioned that she's from the Midwest. It doesn't I don't think it ever specifically says where, but yeah, I mean, there's definitely, like Pritzkers and Crowns, like there's old money in the Midwest for sure.
Right. So part of their relationship depends upon his keeping up appearances and keeping up with the status that they had when they got married. Right. They certainly can't like be underwater, and he can't like lose money, because that was part of the arrangement when they got married. I just assumed that would be the case, right? That she brings money to the table, but like he has to make his own money. And then their daughter goes to, a good school. Oh, a side note from the side note. One thing about the schools is that when you look up like St. Paul's, for instance, one way to tell if they are in this boarding school system is if it's a Catholic school, then it's pretty much already excised from the school system, because most of these boarding schools are either Episcopal boarding schools or they are non-denominational. They don't have, like, for instance, Phillips Exeter, I think, doesn't have a specific religious tie, but the other ones, they're almost exclusively Episcopal. None of them, I think, are Catholic. If it's a Catholic school, that is called a Catholic school. It's not a boarding school or a private school, even though it technically can be those things. It's just not called that. Anyway, sorry, keep going.
No, well, actually, that just one quick thing. And I did want to, I have a million sticky notes in here. And this is something that was interesting because I did want to bring this up. Since you mentioned like the Catholic or the Episcopal schools, where I think it's when he's walking her to, it's when Campbell is the daughter's name. So McCoy, this is early in the book, McCoy is walking his daughter to her bus stop. I think he's walking her to the bus stop because she goes to school. It's called like Taliaferro or something. I guess it's like a day school or whatever.
Yeah, and he actually makes a point of saying anyone who knows anything pronounces it Tolliver.
Oh, that's right. Forgotten about that. Yeah. And so
there was a guy 2 years older than me called Trip Tolliver. And I always thought it was weird because it looks like Taliaferro, like it's Italian, which is very strange for a Southern school. An Italian name, that's how uncouth. But that's why it's pronounced Tolliver.
Tolliver, that's right. Okay, I'd forgotten that. But so she asks him, she just randomly asks him while they're walking on the sidewalk if there's a God. And so he's kind of freaking, as he freaks out about everything, like internally he starts wondering like, oh, what insidious little troublemaker in her class has been spreading this poison. He thinks she still believes in Santa Claus. Now she's questioning the existence of God. So he says, just read this paragraph here. He says, but there is a God, sweetie. So I can't tell you about if there isn't. Sherman tried to never lie to her, but this time he felt it the prudent course. He had hoped he would never have to discuss religion with her. They had begun sending her to Sunday school at St. James Episcopal Church at Madison and 71st. That's the way you took care of religion. You enrolled them at St. James, and you avoided talking or thinking about religion at all. And so religion, I think it's implied there that he's an atheist, but this is part of keeping up appearances, right? Like I was talking about earlier, coming out of the British kind of, society, even go back to like the Jane Austen era, is that you have to keep up this appearance of going to church, enrolling your children at Sunday school. And if anybody asks like, oh yeah, I'm Episcopalian, but like none of these people take it seriously. No one in this book is, no matter what their background is, none of these people are religious at all. I don't think, except, Reverend Bacon, the only person who's arguably religious, and it doesn't get into this in detail, but it's implied, is Henry's mother, Annie, the mother of the kid who got hit. She's the only one who at least appears to have some kind of, regard for religion. And I don't think I don't think she realizes that Reverend Bacon is, like you said, he's just a grifter.
Yeah. So Bacon has a religious paradigm, at least that he uses, right? Who knows his true. Obviously his deeds belie his beliefs, but on the other hand, you could make a case that he is advocating for a group of people, right? He does have a flock, and he does. It's obvious that he knows that he's running a scam, right? And the whole thing that you mentioned about they gave him the money for to build his building, to build his church or whatever, and then the money just disappeared right away, which is like a thing with with this type of pastor, obviously. But the St. James thing, first of all, I can't help but think that Tom Wolfe named the church after St. James in Richmond, which is almost certainly his own Episcopal church in Richmond. But I like something about how he speaks to his daughter and how he tells his daughter what kind of poisonous little toad in your class is saying such things, because that is strong, right? That's strong language. But at the same time, what we see in terms of the insights about him and his character, and that he says that he's lying which makes him, you know, an atheist. I really despised this guy from this moment, especially. Um, I don't get this. I don't understand it. I understand that the societal paradigm is keeping up appearances. It's traditional. These are the things that you do. Your daughter's going to do this. She's going to go to Sunday school. She's going to be confirmed in the church. She may be an acolyte. She's going to do all the stuff that you're supposed to do. But the fact that he has these like secret thoughts about non-belief, to me, it's like, this guy is just empty. He's just a Gumby man. He's a gub gub. Just like, what is his problem? Why would he never? He has the best education and the best life, and he never considers what it means. That to me is just, I've never understood that about these types of characters.
Yeah, and I think that the only possible redeeming quality he has is that he does seem to, and I don't think it's a deep care, but he does seem to have some care for Campbell, his daughter. Because, you know, later on in the book where, you know, he's considering shooting himself because he talks about he does have a shotgun, and he's kind of, you know, trying to figure out the way he would do it, and because it's a double barreled, and, you know, can he reach the trigger and all this. And so he does have some mention of his wife and daughter, but ultimately that's not what stops him from doing it. It's the public turning against him, where it's like, I don't want to give these people the satisfaction. But so I don't think, because he ultimately is a deeply selfish, shallow person, but I do think, I mean, he does seem to have, you know, some concern for his daughter, though again, I don't think it's that deep, because, you know, both him and Kramer, like, it seems like they never really grew up. Like I was saying about Kramer, and I think that, you know, McCoy did the same way, is they can't accept, you know, getting older. They can't accept, you know, having a new time in their life, because they never really seem to grow out of that, you know, hotshot, college age, running around, you know, trying to get with women, you know, going to the bars, all that. Because the thing with Kramer is he's also has so there's this woman, a juror, who he kind of takes a liking to, and he ends up taking her out. And so
many characters in this book, like
yeah,
many characters.
Yeah, I feel like I keep throwing out, people are going to get lost. I keep throwing out of these characters, but the thing with,
one thing about something you just said about not growing out of it, I think that I just realized that they may be that way because they were unsuccessful in terms of their private school or their boarding school society. You know, a school functions as kind of it's training people for the way society is supposed to work in a way. That's like the major thing that school does, right?
Yeah.
You have all these different people at school, all these different types of people, at least at a public school, right? And you got to learn how to go along to get along, because that's what you're going to have to do in life. Well, in private school, it's different, and the competition is for different purposes. But with these guys, it's almost like they were unsuccessful in terms of the competition, and they were they were losers at school. So now is their chance to find the other guy that's like also a loser, and this becomes the school competition that they were unsuccessful, because the dudes who were successful at it, they're not like confronting these guys at work and being like, "Hey, loser." They're like, they're grown out of it. They're like, "Hey, buddy, how you doing? You know, yeah, I'm going to the cocktail party. I got business, and I'm gonna go play tennis," or whatever they're doing. You know, they have their own friends and their own life, but they're also not like, I don't know, if they're doing these like little schemy, dirty things that these characters are doing. Maybe they are, but it's on a different level. Maybe they're doing financial schemes or something. But like the cheating on the wife and all this stuff is just like, so these characters are so gross. They're just like, they're all gross. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think that you know, the women are the same way in that, you know, because the thing with Maria is she's just another guy that or excuse me, Sherman is just another guy that Maria is cheating on her husband with. You know, she doesn't seem to have any respect for him. She's kind of condescending to him, towards him. And
she totally dominates him, bro.
yes, she totally dominates him. And the thing with Kramer is, you know, he takes this woman out and he's, you know, agonizing the whole time over. Oh, I don't know if I can, you know, pay, this dinner's going to like put me in the hole. And, you know, because he has no money. And so he's cheating on his wife, or he's trying to cheat on his wife. And, so, and it's actually mentioned later on. He goes on and on and on and on about his, you know, about himself and about his own job. And then it actually mentions,
like, why are you cheating on this wife? This wife is like, she seems hot.
Yeah.
Right. She's hot, and she's hot and rich, and she's like, I don't know, maybe she's boring or whatever, but like, it's your wife, dude. And the hot lady that he cheats with, it's like, this lady is just a high class hoe.
Yeah.
I mean, she's not cool. Even in the film, it's like, okay, Melanie Griffith, is this like the last movie that Melanie Griffith was hot in? Because
maybe,
like, after this, I think she fell apart. Like, but she, you know, she's all right in the movie, but she's also like super annoying, dude. It's like,
yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah, and that's, you know, with there's an interesting thing with Kramer, you know, when he's trying to cheat on his wife, and he takes this juror out for this case he was trying, and she actually mentions, I think I have a note in here somewhere, but she mentions at some point that, like, how irritating it is, how much she doesn't like going out with men in New York City, because it means 2 or 3 hours of listening to him go on and on about his job, like, which she doesn't care about. But it's interesting, though, there's kind of jumping ahead, but at the end, there's an epilogue where it's mentioned that Kramer basically gets disgraced because it turns out this woman, this juror, that he apparently successfully does cheat on his wife with her, because there's this whole thing about this, they call it the apartment where that Maria was subletting from her friend. Is Kramer was doing the same thing, where he had this, you know, love nest, as they called it, apartment where he was putting his mistress up. And so that comes out, and then he gets disgraced. And so, yeah, I mean, again, it's like he's trying to be McCoy. And so
subletting is just like, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be too critical and too negative about the book, but like, all the sublet, like, I lived in New York for a year. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And subletting it's like incredibly complicated and annoying and difficult. And I guess in the 80s, you know, maybe it was common, especially with these types of apartments, but like, who wants to be the type of person who rents an apartment and then sublets the apartment then you're responsible for the apartment. Even if you're one of these people at this level, like, you're going to sublet your apartment. Like, who knows what could happen to your apartment?
Yeah.
Just rent one apartment, and that's your apartment. And like, just be, I don't know, man. I
don't know. Yeah, it's people doing,
it's like, these people they have the means and the resources and the money to like do so much, even if it's nefarious, you know, shady stuff, right? And the stuff that they choose to do in this is like so lame.
Yeah.
Right. And that sounds like a really weird kind of criticism, but I just think, like, I don't know, compare this to somebody, I think it was TH mentioned in the chat, like, the Republican Party was the Episcopal party of the whatever.
Episcopal Church is a Republican Party of prayer.
Yeah. Yes. And you know, Bush Sr. is an Episcopalian, and many of the presidents have been from the Episcopal Church. But it's like, look at the kind of nefarious stuff that Bush is involved in. I'm not saying that's good, or if it's true, it's alleged. But, you know, it's like, we're talking like Golden Triangle and Operation Zapata and Black Ops and Black Bag Ops and all this stuff, which is like, that is also bad, but it's on a different level than this lame stuff.
Right.
Right. I mean, but those people are also, they're coming out of the same places, the same types of families, the same society, the same schools. So somebody's going into that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's interesting. Just with the Episcopalian thing is, I have the book over there. I can't reach it from here, but Joan Didion wrote a really good book called After Henry, which is a bunch of like journalism because she was kind of part of this new journalism movement that Tom Wolfe was a part of, and
slouching toward Bethlehem.
Yes, she's written a lot of good books. Highly recommend her books. But there's a part in After Henry where she writes about how there was this big deal. I think it was when Reagan, I can't remember if it was during his first run for president or second. I think it was his first, but he was basically having to go up. He went through this Episcopalian, because I guess he was Episcopalian, so he was going up for this church service to take communion. And there's this, I don't know how it's done in the Episcopal Church, but there's this way you're supposed to do it. And it's like he went up and did the whole process wrong. And basically they just went with it because they're like, oh, okay, we're just going to go with it. And then it's like he just walks out like it's like it doesn't faze him. I don't know if he even realizes, or if he does, he doesn't care that he did the whole process for communion wrong. It's just about being seen taking communion, because he has no, I mean, I don't know, I didn't know the guy personally, but it appears he has no regard for anything, and any of the way that Christian customs are and practices and sacraments are intended to be performed.
Reagan was in a Protestant sect, the Disciples of Christ. Nixon was a
Quaker.
Yeah, Quaker. Nixon was a Quaker. Kennedy, of course, was Catholic, which was a huge scandal at the time. I don't know what LBJ was.
I think was he Methodist?
Yeah, that sounds right.
I think he was. I could be wrong. I can look it up, but I'm pretty sure he was Methodist.
Yeah. And then Carter was like some kind of Carter was Baptist.
Yeah, he was Baptist. Yeah.
And then Reagan was, and then of course that kind of led the way. I've got a good Reagan book up there. It's actually not great, but it's by Edmund Morris, Reagan's biography, and that kind of led the way for all of the like weird esoteric stuff that he and Nancy were involved in, like all that stuff. But yeah, he was kind of a non-denominationalist, sort of generalized Protestant. But yeah, the communion thing with Reagan, I can't recall that actual story, but the presidents all worship officially at the National Cathedral in Washington, which is Episcopalian. And actually, I know the dean of the National Cathedral, Randy Hollins. Yeah, he was my youth group leader when I was a teenager. And his wife she's also a minister, and she taught religion classes at school. She mainly taught at the girls' private school, but she also taught at our school. And now he's the dean of the National Cathedral. But anyway, so yeah, the Episcopalian communion, like there's two ways to do it. You either dip the wafer, or you drink like a Catholic does, like from the chalice. So I don't know what he did. I guess he went up there and kind of winged it, and they were like, dude, what's this weird guy doing? I'm sure George H.W. was like, this man is not of our society. I'm going to call my friend John Hinckley Sr. and see what he thinks about this. Oh, his son's in town? Interesting. So you seem kind of disgruntled, Hinckley Jr. Let's do something about that. And then, of course, Bush Jr. became what did he become? Like a Pentecostal or something like that.
I think he was like a non-denominational evangelical or something.
Yeah.
And I can't remember the specific details of the Reagan things. It's been probably 2 years since I read that. But yeah, I mean, and it's interesting because, just not to get too off on this, but I mean, even Trump was Episcopalian. I mean, I think he was probably the same kind of thing because he talked. There was that
Trump's,
interview where
he's
he said,
Presbyterian.
"What's that?"
He's Presbyterian, I think.
Oh, was he Presbyterian? Okay, I thought he was
Yeah.
Episcopalian. I think you're okay. He is. That's right. He is Presbyterian. Okay, I had that wrong, but because I just remember there was that interview that was controversial where he was like, "Oh yeah, I go eat the wafer, take a drink of the wine, whatever, but I don't have anything to repent for, so I'm good. I just do it because
they
it's."
tested my DNA. They said it's not DNA, it's USA. my mother, I don't know if you know this, my mother was Scottish. She that's why we have the golf course in Scotland. His mother's like a Scottish immigrant.
Oh, I didn't know she was an immigrant.
Yeah.
I knew she was Scottish. I didn't realize she was like a first generation.
Well, I mean, they're not like, the American dream story. His dad was a real estate mogul, but still, I guess that's where he got the Presbyterian from his mother.
That would make sense.
Remember when they went over to St. John's Episcopal Church, like across from the White House during the riots?
Oh, we had the Bible upside down.
Well, they were like burning the church.
Yeah.
Spray painting it, and he like walked over there and he had the Bible and he was like, somebody handed me this. They say it's a Bible. I don't know. We're gonna get these Antifa off the White House grounds, and then did pretty much nothing.
Yeah, nothing at all. That was. I think that was. I remember. I think it was somebody that when that reported that they had like busted into that church and were vandalizing it. And Brian Stelter was like, "No, they're not." And he was on Twitter, and people were like, "No, dude, it is." And they sent him. He was like arguing, being, just petulant and annoying about this. And then when it came out that, oh yeah, they actually had busted in and vandalized, he went and deleted all those tweets and just never said anything about it. And I was like, yeah, of course. Right. But yeah, so
just to sanctimonious, they say he's a Santeria, Ron de Santeria. I don't know if that's his heritage, but that's what they say. I don't know what DeSantis is. I guess he's probably Catholic.
He might be. I've actually haven't looked it up. But yeah, so the thing with, just to wrap up the plot here is, so yeah, McCoy. So then when that guy who had been bugging the apartment, the McCoy's attorney, Thomas Killian, his investigator gets a hold of that tape. I don't remember exactly how. And I think somebody, like a friend of his, gave it to him or something. And so then they concoct this thing where, oh, okay, well, Sherman's going to say it was his. And so it's a tape saying that, like what had actually happened. She admitted that she was driving and all that. And so basically the case gets thrown out, is that Kovitsky throws the case out. And then there's, people in the courtroom go crazy. They try to attack Kovitsky. They try to attack, and there's this kind of brawl that breaks out where Reverend Bacon's right-hand man like comes at McCoy. So McCoy punches him in the sternum. And the guy, like goes down, and then, McCoy, he's like ready to fight. It's like, oh, now it's on. And so then in the epilogue, we find out that, Kramer got thrown off the case and McCoy had blown through all his money. So then, because Henry had died. And so, now McCoy was having to represent himself because he had no money. His wife had gone back to the Midwest. And then there was this artist who had hung out in the same circle as Peter Fallow, the journalist. And it turns out that Maria, after her husband had died, who was much older than her, by the way, he was like in his 70s. I think she was in her 20s. She ends up marrying that artist. It was the same artist that she had run off to Italy with, because when the trial, when all that, like the arraignment, everything started, they couldn't find her because she had disappeared to Italy with this, young artist friend of hers. And so
it's like that. Remember that Viggo Mortensen movie where he's an artist and he is, what is it? It's A Perfect Murder. Remember that?
No, I haven't seen that one.
Michael Douglas, and who's the wife? Like Gwyneth Paltrow or someone?
Oh, interesting.
No, is it Diane Lane? Maybe it's Diane Lane, who is pretty hot. was married to Josh. Josh.
Brolin. She was married to Josh Brolin for a while.
But yeah, Viggo Mortensen is the sexy artist painter, the troubled painter, and the wife, has the steamy affair with him. And the husband is not. He don't like that.
Right.
Yeah, but that makes sense because, this was repeated essentially with. God, now what's her name? Anna Nicole Smith when she married. What was the old dude? She married the old billionaire Texas dude.
I know this. I'm gonna have to look it up because I can't think of it off the top of my head. She was. What was that guy's name? Wasn't he connected to Tiny Mustache Man and his?
That makes sense.
Administration. J. Howard Marshall, who was also a Quaker, apparently.
So he and George W.'s dad, Prescott, were buying steel for Hotler. And then that dude got old and married Anna Nicole Smith.
Yes, that's right.
Wow. That's crazy.
That's pretty insane.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. There was just one other thing I wanted to touch on. I think I actually hit most of these. Oh, okay. A couple other things actually I wanted to touch on. We're at 2 hours and 40 minutes, so I don't think we'll go too much longer. But thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Just wanted to say, appreciate everybody in the chat. If you're enjoying what you're hearing, make sure to click the like button, leave a comment afterwards. If you have any, anything you want to throw in, or if you just want to help the algorithm. And so, yeah, definitely check out BLA's channel. I'm sure I know everybody in the chat I've seen so far is a fan and a subscriber over there. But I really appreciate him coming on. And I told him that if he agrees to come back for another literary analysis, we'll definitely do a less convoluted book. Even though I think this one's been good. I think this has gone pretty well. I've been
there's a lot to get out of it, certainly. So,
for sure.
It was not a bad choice. And also Larry Kramer, the name of that dude. Larry Kramer is a famous playwright and Skittles guy. I can't think of what he wrote, but surely the name is not accidental.
Yeah.
But yeah, so also one thing about the film is pretty bad, which is weird because it's Brian De Palma, Scarface, Brian De Palma. It has that famous shot of the Concorde landing at the airport, which the guy who filmed it took the camera and spent tons of time and money to get the shot just right of the Concorde. And now that's like a stock shot of a Concorde.
Yeah, yeah.
But Morgan Freeman is the judge. He was cast as the judge in this. And that's interesting because this was on the heels of his Oscar nomination for Glory, I think. So he got a big paycheck for it. But it's not a bad role for him because the judge you see in this story is the only character who has an objective truth, right? He's bound by a code, and yeah, it's law, but he says throughout that everything he does is for justice.
Yeah.
And although that's an abstract term, he thinks of it in concrete terms, in terms of how people must act, at least in his presence. And so the decisions that he makes are all according to a code of justice. And so that's admirable. That's admirable about him, even though pretty much everyone that he comes across is just like a lower life form in one sense or another. So all he can do is parse out who's worse, right? And what the kind of greater good amongst these people. But he still does that with we admire him for his decisions, I guess.
Yeah, and with the judge, to that point, he repeatedly during this whole showdown where they bring this evidence of the tape of Maria talking about what actually happened, is Kramer's basically arguing with the judge, and he's trying to, because he thinks he has the case in the bag. He thinks this is a slam dunk. He's got his, crack kingpin witness. And so the judge is yelling at him. He's saying oh, your problem, you don't effing listen. You can't effing hear. And so he calls him out and says, like, oh, you know, you're afraid you're going to miss your audience. Like if they go into the judge's chambers to discuss this, he calls him out for, at one point he calls him out saying, oh, you know, you're running Abe Weiss's reelection campaign for him. And he says that he actually says, because, you know, Kramer keeps appealing to, you know, the community, and Kovitsky tells him, he says, what makes you think you can come before the bench waving the banner of community pressure? The law is not a creature of the few or of the many. The court is not swayed by your threats. And, you know, he goes on to kind of derisively compare him to Robespierre in another case where he was waving some petition around. And he said, you played to the mob, didn't you? And perhaps there are those in this courtroom right now who enjoyed that performance, Mr. Kramer. He said, well, I got news for you. Those who come into this courtroom waving banners lose their arms. Do I make myself clear? So, yeah, like you said, he has that. He is guided by the law. Now, you know, you can debate is it a good, bad thing to be, you know, guided by, whatever. But that is sort of the framework through which he sees the world and how he kind of approaches things, how he approaches his job.
Yeah, and you know, we find some sort of resolution with him and his character in general. I don't know. I just also in the movie, Kirsten Dunst is in the film. Do you notice that?
Yeah, she played the daughter.
Yeah, she's the daughter. This role is before even Interview with the Vampire, where she won Best Kiss, by the way, at the MTV Awards for her vampire kiss with Brad Pitt, which is very odd.
Wasn't she like 12 when that was filmed?
Yeah. Yes.
That is okay. I didn't know about that. That's creepy. I didn't know about that award.
It wasn't really that weird at the time because she's like my age.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, you know, whatever. And she had those teeth. But then she was in sidetrack here. She was in the movie Bring It On. She was super hot in that.
Oh yeah.
That's the cheerleading movie. She was also in that other movie where it has Cisco who sings Thong Song, the greatest song of all time. Thong Song is the greatest song of all time. Just going to say that. It's my favorite song of all time. I listened to it probably 700 times on my trip.
Respects.
But yeah, Cisco's in that movie. And she's now married to Jesse Plemons.
Really?
Yes, who is very good. He's going to end up winning an Oscar.
I didn't know about that.
He's the guy who looks like a Walmart plus Target version of Matt Damon.
Yeah.
Like he looks like 3 levels down from Matt Damon, but the same guy.
Yeah,
he's very good. Anyway, sorry for that sidetrack.
No, that was interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think the thing with the film is I watched it this afternoon, and that is if that's a movie. If I had started watching that and I wasn't watching it, you know, for doing this, if I was just kind of watching it on my own time, I would have turned it off about 15 minutes into it. Because
I remember when it came out, because of the title or something, or the poster, because it had Melanie Griffith and Bruce Willis and Hanks on it. And this is like before Hanks was super famous. Right?
Yeah.
This is before Philadelphia. And Bruce Willis is obviously in the movie because they needed star power. They needed like at least one A-list guy in the movie. And they have a bunch of other good actors in the movie. Even the lawyer, Saul Rubinek is the actor's name. He's the guy who plays the producer in the movie True Romance. Remember True Romance with Christian Slater?
Great movie.
He's great in that movie. But Bruce Willis is obviously in this because, like, you know, he was having a high note and he was like, just give me $1 million and I'll be in this shitty movie. Sure, whatever.
Yeah.
But it really is so bad. It's the kind of movie that you watch and you're like, was this movie just a cover for laundering of some sort? Because there's like no point in this movie. It's really weird.
it is now officially the worst movie I've ever seen. I mean, and it sucks because I actually like De Palma. I think he's a great filmmaker, but this movie was the only good performances in this movie. In my opinion, were Morgan Freeman, and I'm really not a Morgan Freeman fan, but I thought he did very well in this movie. And then Kim Cattrall, or however you say her last name, who played.
She is so awesome. I love her so much, dude.
Oh, she was great.
She is so good. She is wonderful. She is a wonderful, like actually beautiful woman.
Yeah.
And she's English by birth, born in Manchester.
Mm-hmm.
In the movie Mannequin and Big Trouble in Little China. Great.
Yep.
Great. She still looks good now. She's great. But yeah, you're right. She's good in it. Morgan Freeman is good. You're not a Morgan Freeman fan?
Not really. I'm not. Never been crazy about his movies.
Well, I mean, look, all the political stuff has been wild, but Morgan Freeman happens to be a close personal friend of mine. No, but I've been to his house, and he's a awesome dude. When I went there, he mentioned something that is kind of related to this film. We were talking about roles that actors, will turn down and why you would turn down a role. And he said that the only role that he absolutely regretted taking was early on in his career. He took a Broadway role where they made him, he dressed like an Indian chief and like he had to run across the stage, like waving an American flag. And he said it was so degrading for some reason, because it was obviously like in context, it was like exploitation. It's like, why him and why this role and why is he doing this in this play? And after that role, he quit acting for a long time, and he was like a fax machine repairman. And then he got back into it and did, Lean on Me and all that.
Yeah.
But this is a bad movie. It is not as bad as Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil, I hate that movie more than any movie I've ever seen. It's so bad. It's Clint Eastwood and Spacey, and it is so bad. But this is close to that. This is close to that.
Yeah, this one, it was just like one of the things that irritated, and I watched it on Prime, and so they'll have I something came, I think I like paused it or something, have like the trivia on the side, and it said something about like I think they originally offered the role of Fallow to because Fallow's British, and that's a big point about his character. They'd offered it to John Cleese, and John Cleese turned it down, and so Bruce Willis took it, but Bruce Willis didn't even attempt to do a British accent. He just did it like normal. And I mean, the movie, like it was so bad, and it was like a farce, but not a good one. It was horrible. Like because at one point Sherman, like they're having a party at their apartment, which didn't happen in the novel. But one thing that was interesting, actually, one thing I did want to point out, I had forgotten to bring this up earlier, is McCoy, because he was sort of agonizing over this one party that him and his wife went to, where he was seen like he was not in a group of people talking, and that's like a huge deal. Is you don't want to be the guy at one of these parties who isn't in, and so he'll try to go to these groups and talk to people, and he gets like snubbed. Nobody wants to talk to him because he's a loser, right?
Yes.
But then once he gets arrested, then these same people who he was, I think if I remember correctly, he had gotten like, because there's a lot of his internal monologue in here. He gets like puffed up about being better than these people. These people are beneath me. Then all of a sudden he gets arrested. He spends, an hour in jail before the arraignment. And now all those people who had snubbed him before and the people that he had been, like bashing, all of a sudden they're interested. They go to another party after all that, and he's like the talk of the town. Everybody wants to hear about it. He starts embellishing stories, trying to, make himself seem like it was worse than it actually was.
Yeah, he's an outlaw, and he's dangerous for their group, right? And he's going to have a good story, which is why I think like the most valuable quality you can have in any area in any area of society is to be a charismatic and good storyteller. Like, especially as a dude, like being a great storyteller is, you will have friends. They want to hear your stories. And now this guy like has something where he can tell a good story. Of course, he's not going to tell a good version of it because he's a loser, right? He's gonna, I don't know. He's gonna stick his chin out and do all that stuff. But
yeah, so it was. I will say, I ultimately, I mean, I think the novel's good. I mean, if people want to read it, I don't. It's a little bit long. It gets kind of tedious. I think it's worth reading. The movie, though, is awful. Don't watch it. It's so bad because there's a scene. I mean, it borders into territory where it's like worse than any of those Z-list comedies you can find on, you'll find on like Amazon Prime or whatever, because there's a scene where they're having a party at his house, and he goes and gets a shotgun, like loads his pocket up with shells, and then just starts shooting the ceiling in his apartment, and people are screaming and running around, and it's like, what? I mean, it's beyond. It's awful. I mean, just truly, it's the low of Palmer's career.
A gun closet in his New York apartment, and it's like, first of all, this guy with the gun closet would have all this like at his hunting lodge or his getaway place in upstate New York or something.
Yeah.
Also, he gives no indication in the rest of the story that he would be able to even have a concept of wielding a gun. Right. And then he pulls it out and they're all like, oh, they're running around like it's upstairs, downstairs, like an English farce or something like that.
Yeah.
It's like, no, this dude, like this guy's breaking and he's like, this guy's turning into, mass, what?
Mm-hmm.
Like that's who he is now. Also, Tom Hanks is totally miscast in the film. Like, in a way, he is actually well cast because he's, kind of flubby and nondescript or whatever, but he's just, I don't believe that he is part of this group at all.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Maybe when he's older, Tom Hanks would fit into this group or something, but he's more of like an everyman guy.
Yeah.
I'm glad that Bruce Willis did not attempt an English accent. That would have been even worse. But he went from doing this movie to that movie Hudson Hawk, which is widely considered the actual worst movie of all time. I saw it when I was 10 and I thought it was cool because he plays like a Highline thief. And he's got these like earrings and he belays into this museum or something and he's in black. I thought it was cool. But if I watched it now, I'm sure I would think it was awful. Also, poor Bruce Willis, I guess he's on the way out. Poor guy. Doesn't he have dementia or he's got something bad?
He's got some kind of, I think it's like a type of dementia where you basically lose the ability to speak. But yeah, which is sad. I mean, it was interesting. I actually did some like Wikipedia level reading about this movie. And apparently, I don't know what he's like now, but apparently everybody on set hated him because he was like arrogant and was just a pain in the neck to deal with during that film. I mean, I think that was still pretty early in his career. So I don't know. Like I said,
who knows what you can believe like about what these people say when they character assassinate somebody? Because I mean, who knows? But like the guy at the time though, he was like the alpha Hollywood guy. I mean, Die Hard was 88. So I don't know. He got cucked. That's too bad by CIA Kutcher. With
I forgot about that.
That's
one other thing, just one last thing on the movie is one of the things that really irritated me was, I mean, in some cases they did away with certain characters and had other characters take up what had been done by different characters in the novel. And I get that sometimes you have to do that to condense things for film. But one of the things that irritated me was that some of the characters, like they were totally different from who they were in the book. So like Henry's mother, for example, who had like a tragic life. She was trying to save up to get out of this housing project in the Bronx. Her husband I think he like somebody had tried to mug him, and he stood up to them, and they ended up stabbing him, and he died.
Yeah,
And then
a noble woman with dignity.
yeah, exactly. And then in the film, she becomes this person who, like, when they start talking about suing, there's a scene where Reverend Bacon, who the way he looked like a character from a Chappelle Show sketch, which I thought was kind of funny.
He looked like Sharpton.
Like who?
Like Al Sharpton. He looked like Al
Oh,
Sharpton.
yeah.
Like exactly. I mean, he was bigger than Sharpton, but like remember Sharpton dressed exactly like that.
Yep.
Tracksuits, gold chains, Jerry curls. Remember he was on the he was in the Sting video, the FBI video, right? He was as an informant. Remember?
Oh, yeah.
Like an informant against the mob in that deal. That was not good.
No, that was bad.
But he had some swag back then.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
and he the thing that irritated me though was that there was a scene where they're in Henry's hospital room with it's his mother, Reverend Bacon, and then the attorney, and I mean, like BLA said, she's like the whole novel she's portrayed as this decent woman with dignity, and then they start talking about suing the hospital for like $100 million or something, and then she's like, oh well, like, oh, I could use some money, and yeah, I want to go like let me get some money, I'm gonna go shopping tomorrow. And that I thought was I don't know, I didn't like that. But one thing I did we're gonna wrap up here in a few minutes. We've been going 3 hours. Shout out to everybody still out there. Appreciate everybody in the chat. Hope y'all are all doing well. But one thing is that some of the cameos were interesting. Like I mentioned, Geraldo Rivera played Robert Corso, who was one of who was the TV journalist. He had a small role, so he wasn't technically, I don't know if it was a cameo because it wasn't technically playing himself, but George Plimpton, some of y'all may be familiar with George Plimpton, the writer. He makes a very brief appearance at this restaurant that Fallow hung out at, and then Richard Belzer as well. He makes a brief appearance as a TV producer who's trying to talk Sherman into selling the rights to this whole story to him. And Richard Belzer, some of y'all may know, he was an actor. He was on Homicide: Life on the Street. He was in Law and Order SVU. And he was also a big conspiracy theory guy as well. So some of y'all may know him from those circles. I think he died maybe like 3 or 4 years ago. But
did he die during Karanka?
I think it was before that. I don't recall off the top of my head, but I think it was like 2018 or 19.
Terrible, but in a way, I hope he was spared all of that stuff, and then also that we were spared, a guy like that then selling out at the line when it came down to what was important. Because a lot of those old school dudes we saw, when it came down to Karanka, it was like, oh no, they totally just went with it, So I don't know what happened with him, but
So he, it looks like I guess was missing. He had retired in 2016, but then he actually died. He actually died earlier this year from complications of unspecified circulatory and respiratory conditions.
That doesn't sound good.
No, it doesn't. But anyway, I mean, we can wrap. Do you have anything else you want to add about the novel or the movie, or what? Anything about Wolfe? What do you want to get into?
You mentioned George Plimpton, and here's the Paris Review anthology. George Plimpton is the Paris Review guy, and Plimpton's interesting because he has CIA ties that have come to light. He and what's the guy's name? McLaughlin from New Directions, I think.
Yeah.
One of those guys. Of course, they were part of the 50s and 60s like culture creation thing with CIA, so they had funding ties with them. And that, of course, like you look at this guy and you think, oh, that makes sense. This guy looks like one of the old boy network, Yale, Harvard, Skull and Bones, CIA, academic guys.
Right.
But nevertheless, Paris Review, which is still in print, still published every month. This is one of my favorite books. This came out in, they published this in 2000. Picador published this in, okay, I can't find a date. 2003. And this is great because Paris Review is known for publishing poets and writers who are lesser known at the time, and then they sort of help to build them up. So it's got Jim Carroll from Basketball Diaries. It's got this has some Ted Hughes in it. It's a bunch of Beat Generation people. Ezra Pound. This is a great book. It's a great anthology. A lot of times people, when they are looking at poetry books to buy, they will find, just anthologies. And if you were ever to do that, that is the book to get. Also, it makes sense because Plimpton and Tom Wolfe, I'm sure, I don't know if they were friends, but I'm sure they had a, some sort of communication with each other. And here's Tom Wolfe. And Tom Wolfe, who, by the way, dresses like specifically like the most dandy, New York literati dandy character of all time. He does that purposefully.
Yeah. And
that's part of his like brand. But it's interesting because I've never really gotten a handle on that because, it's not like that's certainly not a Richmond, Virginia thing to do. And so I suppose that that was part of his character. He was eccentric. And then that just became he's known for like wearing these white suits.
Mm-hmm.
And in that interview with Buckley, I can guarantee that that's one of the things that throws Buckley off. And Buckley really wants to ask him, so what's the deal, right, with the dandy suits? Why can't you just wear a skull and bones tie like everyone out there? But, I don't know if Tom Wolfe was skull and bones. He went to Yale, probably not. But again, if you watch that interview, you can tell in the first 3 seconds of his talking that he's from Richmond. Like he is the most Richmond dude. And I mentioned at the beginning of this that my own teacher, who was the poet laureate, knew him really well. They were friends. They knew each other personally and professionally because they were both writers. And that my 7th grade English teacher, who I reached out to, but I didn't hear in time, Tom Wolfe was his babysitter when he was little. So he's one of these, well-known like Richmond people, even though he lived in New York for most of his professional life. Mm-hmm. But so interesting character, interesting guy. And I related to major parts of this book because of, the academic things in the schools and all that. And I know people that are like peripheral to this sort of world. But the thing that I don't like about the book is how like empty and dorky the characters can be.
Yeah.
And I know that they're like that purposefully, but I think that Bret Easton Ellis, I don't know his motivation when he wrote American Psycho other than like what's in the text and from his father and stuff like that, who was in finance. But I bet you Bret Easton Ellis read this book. I think he'd already graduated from Bennington, but I bet you he read that book and wrote American Psycho as a kind of anti-Bonfire of the Vanities. Like it's the same kind of story, but in reverse or obverse. Mm-hmm. And even that, we haven't even mentioned the title of the book, by the way. The title is interesting because it has a religious connotation, right? Mm-hmm. It's supposed to draw the reader to mind, the like the Italian Catholic burnings that happened in like the 1500s when they would take objects that they saw as outright like leading to sin. Like for instance, like mirrors was one thing, like mm-hmm. mirrors or makeup or, vanity objects. And they put them in a bonfire and they burned them. And I know that Martin Luther later like took inspiration from this sort of thing during the Reformation. Like he was like, it also, how does that apply to the book? I guess that the bonfire is the metaphorical trial and what the characters go through, trial by fire in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
But they are never self-aware enough to realize that they're in that very trial and that like their lives, their reputation, or their soul is at stake. They don't care.
Yeah.
And I guess if anything, that is probably as good a statement about 1980s excess and New York, capitalist societal, dichotomy and differences amongst the levels in society as anything else. I mean, this seems to be the grand statement about that. So,
yeah.
So anyways, yeah, I'm going to stop babbling now. I'm glad that you brought up this book and that you recommended it. If not just for the fact that it's Tom Wolfe, but, I probably would not have gone into this book. So I appreciate that you had the idea to do this.
Yeah, I appreciate you you coming on and undertaking this this massive tome with me. One last thing we were talking about this earlier today is Bruce Hornsby, because you had brought up Bruce Hornsby and I'm a Bruce. I'm mostly familiar with the live work he did with the Grateful Dead in what was it, late 80s, early 90s, but you did want to talk. So I do want to hear what you had to bring with Hornsby.
That's just the way it is. So Hornsby is another Richmond character, and a lot of people I know him because he went to my rival school. He went to collegiate school in Richmond, and so I think that in a weird way, this ties into Tom Wolfe because like this is the music that these people would be listening to at the time. Like, so Hornsby's weird because he played for the Dead, but he's also like a straight-laced preppy, like, polo shirt wearing short-haired dude. And he's just like a normal guy. Everybody I've ever talked to who knows him is like, no, he's just a regular dude. He's you should go to a party at his house, he'll play piano and be regular for you, which is pretty cool. He also said that Tupac sampling his music was like the greatest thing ever for him because he loves that it allowed his music to reach out to such a huge, wide audience and have such an impact on the youth. And also he appreciates the royalty checks. So
yeah, it's interesting you mention with him being kind of like the antithesis, at least, in terms of how he dressed and carried himself with the Grateful Dead. But what's so interesting about that is if you watch any of that footage from the era where he was playing with them, like he doesn't look out of place, which when I was first getting into the Grateful Dead and I knew who Bruce Hornsby was, from my dad. And then once I found out he played with the Dead, I was like, whoa. And so I went and found some of the live footage, and he looks like he belongs up there. It's kind of interesting that, and his playing, I think he nailed it with what he brought to the table. But that was what was something that kind of tripped me out is how it didn't clash.
He's a talented dude, and I think he was a classically trained pianist, and then became a great jazz pianist. In like that sort of 80s, early 90s tradition where the guy could play anything.
Yeah.
He can play anything at any time, in any mode. So also he doesn't look out of place because he looks like the actual average Dead fan. Like if you went to a concert right now, the average dude that you see is not like, a guy with like dreadlocks and, wearing a tie-dye shirt. It's like a guy like that went to UVA and is wearing a Lacoste shirt or like a trucker hat or whatever. Like it's actually a pretty like normal looking crowd. So he just kind of fits in. And my aunt knows him really well. I think they might've been the same class at collegiate, but yeah, he's, I don't know if he still lives here. I think he lives like on the river in Virginia. And his kids are probably grown now, but they went to private school. But yeah, he's just like a regular dude, which is cool. because it's funny that, like, I don't know. I think it's funny when you find a city in America where these like very different types of famous people came out of it. You know, like, obviously California and New York, like they have all they've got that on lock. But Virginia, it's like D'Angelo. You ever heard of D'Angelo? Brown Sugar. He came from Richmond.
No, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and then like Portsmouth and Virginia Beach is like Timbaland and Missy Elliott and
Clips?
Pharrell. Yeah, Clips. Yep, the Neptunes. Actually, one of my old friends, she got spotted when we were like 13. She got spotted and she became a like big time model. She was on the cover of Italian Vogue and all this stuff. And she dated Pharrell when she was like 16, because he also went to private school. He went to, I think, Norfolk Academy that we used to crush in lacrosse. Anyway, that's another story. But yeah, I just think that's funny. And yeah, so Tom Wolfe, one of the big time writers, important writer. And for anyone out there listening, if you're going to read a Tom Wolfe book, I would start with The Right Stuff, because it's like infinitely readable. It's a page turner, and it's about the astronaut program in the 60s. And it is like, you do get a sense of like, oh, this is, American propaganda type stuff when you're reading it. But in a way, it's kind of outside of all that. It's like, it treats them like regular people, regardless of what the truth of all that is. But like, for instance, the part about Chuck Yeager is that sealed Chuck Yeager as like the legendary dude, because he's a test pilot and like he broke his leg riding a horse that morning, and then he gets in the X1 anyway, and he uses a broom handle to like shift the gear in the plane. Then he breaks the sound barrier. He's the first guy to break the sound barrier. And then later he crashes one of the jets, and it's like an inferno, and he's burned everywhere, but he like walks out of the flames, and that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And that's Tom Wolfe writing that. The electric Kool-Aid acid test is great, because that's about, LSD in the 60s and Ken Kesey and the Merry Pranksters. But also, this is a little known book by him. This is called Radical Chic and Mau Mauing the Flat Catchers. Weird title, but it's a two-parter, and it's just a critique of society in the 60s and how high society like had this weird thing where they were so rich and they had everything, but they wanted to hang out with Castro and with the Mau Mau's and these revolutionaries in New York. So it's an interesting look at a specific time and place in America that you can't really get many other places. So anyway, that's Tom Wolfe. And thanks again, man, for having me. I really appreciate it. I can't believe we've gone over 3 hours. Dang, time flies.
Yeah, do you have time? One last thing. I don't want to keep you too long.
No,
one last thing I wanted to bring up. I forgot earlier. Do you think about this passage in here where he talks about Jose Delgado and this experiment? I instantly was like, oh, MK Ultra. And now I know you know a lot more about MK Ultra than I do. I don't know if you remember this specifically, where he talks about this experiment in which healthy college students lying on beds in well-lit but soundproof chambers, wearing gloves to reduce the sense of touch and translucent goggles to block out specific sights, begin to hallucinate within hours. Now, I don't know if that was a specific MK Ultra experiment, but do you remember that? And did you have any takes or any insight or anything on this?
Do you have this edition?
No, I have there's the paperback.
What chapter is that?
Let me check. This was in chapter 23, Inside the Cavity.
Let me find it real quick.
It's the paragraph that starts about the Bororo Indians, a primitive tribe who live along the Vermelho River.
It's crazy how much he encompasses of the time in this book, even touching on Delgado. He says, let's see. Also, by the way, the character's name Corso. Who else is Corso? Corso is Jonathan Depp's character's name in The Ninth Gate.
That's right.
And I always thought he was named in that after the poet Gregory Corso. Surely there's some connection there. Who was a beat poet who was in the same kind of sphere as Ginsberg. He was younger than they were, but he was one of the major beat poets.
Mm-hmm.
He wrote a book called Happy Birthday of Death about the atomic bomb. Let's see. Hold on. Black Puerto Ricans. The Boro Indians, a primitive tribe who live along the river in the Amazon jungles of Brazil. This reminds me of Burroughs and the Yage letters.
Oh, yeah.
Jerry and I covered this. Believe that there's no such thing as a private self, right? So ego death. The Bororos regard the mind as an open cavity, like a cave or a tunnel or an arcade, if you will, in which the entire village dwells and the jungle grows. Interesting that we have the jungle metaphor again here, because of what we've been talking about this whole time. In 1969, Jose Delgado, the eminent Spanish brain physiologist, pronounced the Bororos correct. For nearly 3 millennia, Western philosophers had viewed the self as something unique, something encased inside each person's skull, so to speak. This inner self had to deal with and learn from the outside world, of course, and it might prove incompetent in doing so. Nevertheless, at the core of oneself, there was presumed to be something irreducible and inviolate. Not so, said Delgado. Each person is a transitory composite of materials borrowed from the environment. The important word was transitory, and he was talking not about years, but about hours. He cited experiments in which healthy college students lying on beds in well-lit but soundproofed chambers, wearing gloves to reduce the sense of touch and translucent goggles to block out specific sights, began to hallucinate within hours. Without the entire village, the whole jungle occupying the cavity, they had no minds left. So what he's talking about here is, it's interesting that he brings up something so that seems to be so what's the word? I don't know, perpendicular to his narrative, right? I mean, he's bringing up like that's MK Ultra. He's talking about MK Ultra there, and that's obviously related to electric Kool-Aid acid test, right? But and also it's funny that Ted K just died, and this is like basically that. But what he's referring to there is the chambers where they would dose students, and then they would deprive them of any sensory like data. And like the best example of this is like those chambers that are so soundproof that you start to hear people report that they start to hear like the blood in their veins. They hear their own heart beating, and then they start to hear like their breathing, and then they can hear their blood pumping in their body.
The sensory deprivation tanks.
Yes. And it's sensory deprivation, but like to the absolute max.
Mm-hmm.
And there's one in Mississippi. I know that at Ole Miss. And I think the point of it is that any normal person, like it would start to drive you insane, in the sense that what he's saying is that we get our sense of meaning and ourself from empirical data. So if we're deprived of that, then we like lose ourselves and we lose our sanity. But in actuality, that's not true, right? Because we do have a self and we do have a soul that exists apart from sensory data, because you still understand that that's happening to you, even though it's driving your logical mind insane.
Mm-hmm.
So I think what he's saying there is that this functions as kind of a metaphor for the 80s in general, where all of these characters are empty. They're walking around with sense data, and they have they live according to their senses. Like, look at what Sherman said at the beginning about religion, right? That's all he thinks about and knows. But they are, in a way, like as insane or selfless or characterless as the people in the MK Ultra tank, because those people have no sense and these people have all sense, but they both are unaware of their own self. They aren't strong enough in terms of who they are and their character to understand that they have something precious, I suppose. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. I mean, I think because in a sense, I mean, both Kramer and McCoy, they're sort of blind in a sense. You know, these are guys who they may not have everything they want, but it's like they're employed. You know, they have stable job. Well, I mean, McCoy's is arguably less stable, but it's like they have jobs. You know, they're married. They have children. Like they have the things that like most normal people, and it's like they're totally blind to that. And yeah, I would agree that yeah, I mean it's I was going somewhere that I lost my train of thought, but I would agree with that analysis on that.
I mean, is he implying that this has some sort of specific effect on Sherman? I mean, surely Sherman wouldn't be in these. Like Sherman would not be a part of any of this stuff.
No, he goes on to talk about. Let me see if I can find this. So he goes on to say that he cited no investigation, meaning Delgado, cited no investigations of the opposite case. However, he did not discuss what happened when oneself, or what one takes to be oneself, is not a mere cavity open to the outside world, but has suddenly become an amusement park to which everybody, was it todo el mundo, tout le monde, tout le monde, whatever, comes scampering, skipping, and screaming, nerves a tingle, loins aflame, ready for anything. All you've got, laughs, tears, moans, giddy thrills, gasps, horrors, whatever, the gorier, the merrier, which is to say he told us nothing of the mind of a person at the center of a scandal in the last quarter of the 20th century.
Interesting couple of paragraphs there. Those are probably the best paragraphs of the entire book, because for one, that last sentence is the bonfire of the vanities in a way, right?
Yeah.
Or it's like the Decameron, or it's the Mask of the Red Death, or Eyes Wide Shut, or you know, any of these things where it's like the people in this part of society are ready for any sort of visceral thrill of the body, and the destruction of the self is like the last part of that. That's the way it always is with these people, right? It's always like in Dorian Gray, right? Dorian Gray experiences every sort of thrill. He experiences everything. And in the end, he kills someone so he can experience what it's like to take life. And then after that, he destroys his own self. Because the trying to like consume life in terms of the senses is just being a slave to the passions, and leads to degradation and destruction. So who are the virtuous characters in this book? Well, the judge. We talked about the judge. Probably the daughter. I mean, the daughter, you know, is still in her innocence, so that's good.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Judy, McCoy's wife, I think she seems to be somewhat. I mean, maybe she's kind of shallow, but I think she does seem to genuinely care about her daughter. I think she does try to be a good mother, even though, I mean, it's like she clearly doesn't have a job. She, you know, just seems to find expensive things to put in their apartment. So she, you know, her daughter has a nanny, and then the daughter goes to I guess a day school. So it's not like she could be staying home raising her, but she's not. She's doing, her character's not really that well developed. So you could make a case for, yes, there's some virtue there. Kramer's wife, we don't really know enough about her. She's kind of, she appears really only in two places.
Well, even her interior decorating, like her hobby is, you know, she's trying to create something. She's trying to do something actively. So that's good.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's fine that she doesn't have a job. She doesn't need to. I mean, her daughter's going to come home and then she's going to be with her daughter. So that's good.
Right.
She tells her husband at one point when they're at the party, we are husband and wife. It is highly taboo. It's uncouth for us to be seen together at this party. Like, go and mingle.
Right.
So she's trying to make her husband better in that sense by being like, you need to be what all the dudes are off talking to the other. You need to go and mingle like a regular guy. Don't stand here like a pathetic loser talking to your own wife at a party. That's very weird. And I agree with her.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, I think she, and she was much more patient and she stood by him to an extent. I think at the end in the epilogue, it even mentions that she was there, even though they were estranged. She was still there in the courtroom, but she told him, like, look, you're going out, like, he was cheating on her and all that. So she's not going to be like because he basically McCoy wants, he wants it both ways. He wants to, go out and gallivant around town with other women, but then he wants to, his wife to be there and be all supportive and,
even his sexual trysts with Maria or whatever. It's like, I never got the sense that he is into her because, like, for actual lust. It's almost like he's imitating what he thinks lust would be, but he doesn't actually have enough passion to, like, be with her in that sense. I don't know. I just, he's so shallow that even when he's cheating on his wife, it's not believable. Does that make sense? I mean,
yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, I would agree with that completely. It felt very forced on his part. It's almost, like he wants to be that, 17th century French libertine, who has a mistress in some apartment that he pays for, but he doesn't even have the money. Like, she's the one with the money, because she's married to that guy who's, taking people and their animals on pilgrimages to Mecca on his fleet of jets. Like, he's, people from the Middle East, he's taking them to Mecca. Like, has more. I mean, it's not her money. It becomes her money when her husband dies, but she has more wealth than he does. So
she reminds me in that sense that she does that. She reminds me of Julia Roberts' character in Charlie Wilson's War. Have you seen that movie?
No, I haven't seen
it. Actually, Philip Seymour Hoffman as the CIA guy, Tom Hanks. It's about the Mujahideen and, like, how we armed the Mujahideen in the 80s.
Yeah.
And Julia Roberts is like this Texas socialite who puts the whole thing together and, like, funds it because it's good for her. Like, she has some Christian cause where she wants to fight the, atheistic communists or whatever. And so she hooks Tom Hanks, the senator, up with the CIA and with the arms guy. And then, like, they do the whole thing in Afghanistan. It's a good movie. It's very, very well done. But she reminds me of that character. That sort of mentality. Although she's much more of a hoe in this, obviously.
Right.
But anyway, well, this has been great, man. Thank you so much. And I love a deep dive into literature or movies or anything you got. So
yeah, definitely. We'll do some more of these. So I've got plenty of ideas for stuff. So we'll and here in the future we'll see what else we get into. But thanks everybody for tuning in. Much appreciated, everybody. So make sure you click the like if you've enjoyed this. Check out everything. Check us out on Instagram. I think I have all the links and YouTube channels and everything. So
you're doing pretty well here, man. I mean, getting, like, the views that you and I get on this are pretty decent for for our content. So it's been doing pretty well. And just shameless plug here. You can catch me. Let's see. I'll be doing an analysis of the movie Nefarious with DPH, Church of the Eternal Logos, on, let's see, that's tomorrow night on his channel. And then I'm doing a Shakespeare on Love stream with Taming of the Shrew and Much Ado About Nothing and some of his love poems next week or this weekend or something. That'll be a high IQ literature renaissance stream. And then also I'll be doing an analysis of the movie Jarhead with Jake Gyllenhaal from 2005. Sam Mendes, great movie with my friend Grunt, who knows a thing or two about this firsthand from Boiler Room. So,
oh, nice.
Yeah, check that out. I think that's going to be next like Wednesday. So, anyway, thanks, man. Really appreciate it. Had a great time. Shouts out to everybody in the chat. Thanks for being here and watching. And you guys, please share the stream. Let people know that this exists and that they can watch it and that they can get a deep dive into literature and all sorts of topics here at your friend Maddie, Digital Minefield, the real Cooter Brown, JD out of context.
Yes. Yeah, Jarhead, great movie, terrible book is how I felt about it. Did not enjoy it. I didn't even finish the book. It was so bad, but the movie was great. So I'm looking forward to that one.
To Anthony Swafford. Yeah, I haven't read the book and I've avoided the book on purpose because I've heard that. And then I couldn't find a copy of it. So it's interesting. Are they completely different?
I actually don't even think I made it far enough into the book to get a really good sense of that. It just was not well written. It's been probably 3 or 4 years since I tried to read it, but yeah, I don't know. It was terrible. I would say don't waste your time on it. Even if you can find a copy, I would. That's my recommendation, is to pass.
The movie is so well done. You know,
it's
got the ubiquitous, ever-present conspiracy theorist character. It's got the sad, poignant character, the Skarsgård character. It's got Jamie Foxx is so underrated and excellent in that movie. His little monologue when the oil fields are burning, and he says, "You know why I do this shit? Because I love this shit." Ooh rah! Like when he says that, that's a great, totally underrated scene in film. That's a great scene, and being about the first Gulf War, it's so good. It was so much about the war on terror from a different war looking back. So it's a good movie.
Yeah, that scene where it's like raining oil is that scene's probably stuck with me more than any other scene in any film. But that's good because the first Gulf War, I mean, World War II, we've got a million World War II movies, 10 million Vietnam movies. We've now gotten a bunch of, our Iraq and Afghanistan. But yeah, first Gulf War, it's nice to have one of those. So, but yeah, everybody. So yeah, make sure to check those out. And we will see you all again here soon.
Peace, y'all.